Good evening, everyone. I call the September 11th, 2023 school board meeting to order. It is 6:07 PM. We're in conference room C of the Fisher Administration Building at 12121 West North Avenue. I'm going to pause this evening on September 11th for a moment of silence. Ms. Summers, please call the roll.
Mr. Morris?
Here.
Dr. Hoyk? Here. Ms. Willis? Here. Dr. Worley? Here. Ms. Heimer-Rolland? Here. Mr. Meyer?
Here.
Dr. Jessup Anger?
Here. There's been a question of our IT team if captions are on for the webinar.
Yes, they are.
Thank
Users
you.
just need to hit the CC button on the bottom left of the screen or in the WebEx app, if that's what they're using.
Thank you so much. Public comment on non-agenda items. Members of the Wauwatosa School Board value the input of students, parents, staff members, and community members. The board's regularly scheduled meetings provide an opportunity for opinions and concerns to be expressed publicly. The board values all comments and will respectfully consider this input in decision-making. The board requests that individuals limit their comment on each item to 3 minutes. Following any comment, an individual board member may respond on the issue or issues raised. However, it is not the intent of the public comment portion of the agenda for the board to enter into a debate with a member or members of the community. Because non-agenda items are not publicly posted in advance, no action will be taken on public comment regarding non-agenda items this evening. Jamie, is there anything online for public comment?
I see no hands raised.
Thank you. We will move on. Our next item is district celebrations. Strong start to the new school year. Dr. Means.
Thank you, Dr. Jessup Anger, board members, community members. We posted a brief PowerPoint and slideshow on board docs. I don't know, and I want to just say to the community, we are switching over from Zoom to WebEx. And so if you're wondering why we're having technical difficulties, that's what's happening today. But Jamie, I don't know if you are able to allow me to share my screen so I can show the slides.
You're now the presenter.
That's great.
And it is shared.
Excellent. So just wanted to share these slides with everyone. We had our official kickoff on August 28th with staff coming back, and it was really exciting to have all of our teachers back. I want to make sure that we give a lot of credit and acknowledgement to our human resources team and principals, because they, together as a team, they do all the hiring. Ms. Ozowski just updated me with our statistics. We have 98.8% of all of our teacher positions filled. That is a stark difference from last year. And I want to just pause and thank this governing team. I can share with you, I went to a regional meeting just last week, Friday, with my colleagues, and they commented on the work that you did with the 12% increase to teachers, for teachers. We asked our teachers at the beginning of our new teacher week, how many of them were new to the profession. It was about a third. And that's rare. And in my 30-year arc in education, typically the new teacher orientation, you have 2/3, if not 80% of the staff saying that they're new to the profession. So 2/3 of the staff who have decided to come to Wauwatosa are veteran educators who left their districts and came here. And they talked about the fact that there are values and there are belief systems. And they looked at our strategic plan, and that was the reason why they came to our school district. But it didn't hurt that you in this boardroom made teaching honorable in this school system, and that it just wasn't lip service, but you are compensated, teachers. So I want to again say thank you. So teachers started their official day, the first day back on August 28th in their schools. The second day, we all came together as a school district, and we were at Wauwatosa West, and it was an exciting day. We had a great kickoff. I want to thank the leaders from our Division of Academic Performance and the Division of Pupil and Family Supports, because together they led the professional learning. We heard often last year that we need to make our professional learning more robust. Well, it was quite the professional learning that teachers were exposed to, not only on the 29th, but then again on the 30th and 31st. And so teachers were prepared, they were supported, and we really had a great week of preparation. We came back last week and we had a variation of a strong start. We were really excited about what we were able to do in the morning of, I think that was September 5th, where our high school freshmen were greeted by upperclassmen, and they were shown around the schools. And you can see that they were received quite warmly. I had a chance to see both high schools in action. I was really excited about the fact that our sixth graders had an opportunity to have an entire day of walking the hallways, getting familiar with their new school in a way where they were greeted by their staff, the teachers that will work with them. And again, I think the variation of a strong start was something that was very successful. We had staff members and parents tell us that their children were less anxious after that first day. And so I just want to show a few pictures of all the good things that happened. They being our students were received well. You can see here, I'm going to try to blow this up if I can. Class of 1972, graduate of Wauwatosa East, Dennis McBride was at Longfellow greeting students. Our good mayor was there. He was at a few schools. He was at Jefferson, he was at Longfellow, he made the rounds. And then finally at our elementary schools, our PTAs and PTOs really did a good job in welcoming students. You can see on the bottom here, Mr. Russell and the Wolverines of Washington Elementary School having an official ribbon cutting for their elementary school. We're really excited. I just talked to Mr. Brightman earlier today. The playground at Eisenhower is still on track to be done at the end of this month. Hard to believe that's only about 2.5 weeks away. So I guess I would just conclude by sharing with you that we have teachers in place. I think the one school that I would indicate some level of concern is Longfellow Middle School. We just hired an English language arts teacher today. And I know we still have some special education hires that we need to do. That's probably the one pressure point school that we have to continue to be diligent around and do some good hiring. But everywhere else, we have staff in place, and we're ready for a really good school year. It's been a good start, and so we intend to continue to have a good start. So just wanted to share that good news with the board before we jump into our business today.
Thank you very much, Dr. Meese. Any questions or comments from the board on the beginning of the year? Standing. We will then move into the consent agenda. Are there any items on the consent agenda which board members would like to remove for separate discussion and action? Jessica?
It is recommended that the school board approve the consent agenda, and I so move.
May I have a second? Second. Give that to Dr. Worley. Any board comments or questions on our consent agenda? Ms. Wills?
I would just like to say it was really great to see so many hires of our support staff. I know that that's been, a gap for us. And then also to see how many current staff members received bonuses for referring people. I mean, I think that's a great sign when you have people in your business that want to bring their friends along. So it was nice to see that.
Any community comment, Jamie, online?
No, there are no hands raised.
Just participating before you vote. I just want to thank Mr. Patrick Cannon for his donation to the Scott Schrader field. That is an ongoing memorial to Scott Schrader, one of the first casualties of Desert Storm, but also a Wauwatosa East graduate. We've named that athletic field in his honor, and just very thankful to the community nationally that continues to contribute to that outstanding field and gathering place for our community. We're committed to making sure that that field continues to be a shining example of the good work that Scott did while he was a student here in Wauwatosa.
Thank you, Dr. Means.
Mr. Morris?
Yes.
Dr. Hoyk? Yes. Ms. Willis?
Yes.
Dr. Worley? Yes. Ms. Hammer Rowland?
Yes.
Mr. Meyer?
Yes.
Dr. Jessup Binger?
Yes. And the consent agenda does pass. Next up is our Strategic Goal 6 Operations, Community Change and Enrollment Projections Report presentation by MD Roffers Consulting. Dr. Means, I'll kick this to you in a moment. Mr. Redden. A quick recap for the community. This is something that the board voted to move forward with, I think early in the year, January, February window, if memory serves. And the board received a hard copy of this several, I would say 2 months ago or so. A really thorough, I thought, analysis, very interesting read. The consultants are here with us this evening. And then the board, I believe, will also be meeting with the city in the next week or two to talk about this, to see what information might be shared across the organization. So Mr. Brightman is here, Dr. Means. Any other setup before we bring our consultants in virtually?
No. Yeah, just to introduce Nick Johnson. He'll be doing the presentation for us tonight. He's already presented twice or been at 2 meetings for the TOSA 2075 group. It's a very comprehensive report. I think it's 88 pages, if I recall correctly. A lot of information there. It's just, to me, fascinating to read this report several times and get something new out of it every time. I'm not going to steal his thunder with what I see as the punchline for this. I'll let him do that and we'll comment on it later on. So, Nick, are you with us? Or Jamie, is Nick with us?
I am. Can you hear me?
We can.
Okay, great. Let me share my screen. I believe I was just made the presenter. Okay. Oops, there we go. Can you all see my screen?
Yes.
Okay, great.
Yeah, we can now.
Get this started. Perfect. Well, thanks for having me. I'm happy to be here virtually. Like Keith said, I was at the TOSA 2075 task force meeting twice last month, and happy to join virtually. I'm not too far. We're in the Madison area. I'm hopeful that you can't hear my 2-year-old daughter. I think I hear her screaming in the background or something, and I think my dog is barking too. So hopefully you can't catch up on that. But anyway, my name's Nick Johnson. I'm a planner and project manager with MD Roffers Consulting, here to present our community change and student enrollment projections project for you all that we began, I think, in about March of this year and then finished in June or July. So who we are? So we are municipal, regional, and school district planning experts with over 30 years of experience in the field. We've projected enrollment for over 40 Wisconsin school districts, including larger urban school districts such as the Wauwatosa School District, as well as many suburban, small town, as well as very small rural school districts. Our methodology really relies on 4 main factors. The first is analyzing housing market trends. The second is new housing development. The third is generational shifts, and the fourth is demographic change. A quick little outline of my presentation today. I'll first go over some recent trends that will be pertinent for you all to understand before we get into the projections. Go over an overview of our projection methodology, then get into our housing projections, student enrollment projections, and compare those projections to the building capacities. Recent trends in your district. Overall enrollments decreased by about 295 students, or about 4% over the past decade. That generally is in line with the statewide decrease of 6% in public school enrollment over the same time frame. Nearly all of that decrease was focused in the elementary grade levels, decreasing by about 280 students. That's shown here in the red in the graph in the right side, right part of the slide. Middle school enrollment, grades 6 to 8, remained fairly stable, decreasing by only about 50 students. And then high school enrollment also remaining fairly stable, increasing by about 39 students. This is all despite significant open enrollment in. Each year since 2012, there's been about 1,000 net student gain through open enrollment. Shown here, open enrollment in the green graph, open enrollment out in the red, and then the net open enrollment in the gray bar there. 80% of students who open enroll into your schools live in the Milwaukee Public School District, and there has been some decrease in open enrollment in over the past few years, really since 2018. The city of Wauwatosa is growing. It is increasing in population. It's increased by about 2,000 residents from the 2010 to the 2020 census. During that same time frame, the median age in the city decreased from about 40 years old in 2010 to about 38 and a half years old in 2020. This is pretty important to mention. It's fairly unusual. The county, state, and nation have been experiencing increasing median age, so experiencing an aging population, whereas that trend is the reverse in Wauwatosa. The population aged 25 to 44, we zero in on that age range as that's what we like to call the reproductive age population. That increased by about 7%. Much of that increase was actually in the population aged 30 to 39, which comprises the bulk of the millennial generation. Births have been increasing in the city overall. They increased from 2010 to 2017, decreased for a few years through 2019, but then have been on the upswing again through 2022. We do think this is indicative of a future trend that will continue to happen through the 2020s of increasing births, really due to the large millennial generation beginning to have children. More births could also be related to increasing diversity in your community. Between 2010 and 2020 in the city, the white population remained fairly stable. It decreased by about 3%, while the Hispanic, Black, Asian, and 2 or more race populations increased anywhere from 30% to 130%. This is important for us to know and research and factor into our projections, as it can lead to more students. Per federal data, Milwaukee County, those populations have anywhere from a 46 to 58% higher birth rate than white women. As I'm sure you all are aware of, there's been significant recent housing construction in your district and your city. There's been over 2,000 new housing units permitted in the city over the last 10 years, about 200 or so per year. Virtually all of those are coming in the form of multiple family housing. So any form of apartments, condominiums, townhomes, that's all factored into multiple family housing. The rate has accelerated recently. In 2021, there were about 250 new housing units permitted. In 2022, there were just over 300. And we don't see that slowing down anytime soon. Most of that has been built in the Tosa Village Center, as well as the North Mayfair Road corridor and the Mayfair collection area. Different types of housing generate different numbers of students. Typically, single-family homes generate the most numbers of students for a school district, and multiple family, especially new multiple family, typically generates the fewest. That rings true too for the Wauwatosa School District. In Wauwatosa, each new multiple family unit generates about 0.05 students, so significantly lower than what most people think. About 20 units generates 1 student. So if you think of a hypothetical apartment building with 100 apartments, there will likely only be about 5 students coming from that apartment building. Older multiple family housing tends to be a little bit more affordable, tends to produce a little bit more students than new multiple family. And then single family home sales generate anywhere from 0.22 to 0.29 students. So you need about 3 or 4 single family home sales to generate 1 student for your school district. That's important for us to know, and map 3 from our report shows that, shows single-family home sales by neighborhood. In many of these neighborhoods, we actually did see enrollment increase, like in neighborhood 10 over the past decade. But in many others, enrollment has really remained stable or even decreased. Getting into a brief overview of our projection methodology. So we first divided the district into 56 unique neighborhoods. They're shown here on map 1 from the report. And those are essentially just puzzle pieces for us to do unique analysis as well as projections on each of those neighborhoods. Step 2, we determined the number of housing units in each neighborhood as of March of this year. Step 3, we were able to, using student address data supplied by the district, able to place each of the students in the district within each of those 56 neighborhoods. Step 4 is a very big one for us. It's just condensed here. It's analyzing demographic change, so seeing where different populations of people live, whether they're women of reproductive age or different racial or ethnic groups, where they live, as well as future housing expectations, where new housing is being planned, using city plans, discussions with the City of Wauwatosa planners, as well as other residential developers and others in the housing market. We then projected housing growth for our 4 projection periods. That's 2024, 2027, 2030, and 2035. Using information from step 4 and 5, we were able to project our student per housing unit ratios in step 6 there for each neighborhood. So how is the housing in that neighborhood generating students? We then multiply our projected housing units by our projected student per housing unit ratios. Multiplying those gives us our resident student enrollment projections. In these last couple steps here, step 8 is just assigning resident students to different schools and programs in your district with the understanding that if a student might live in the Longfellow middle elementary attendance area, they could, or middle school attendance area, they could still attend some other either virtual school or intra-district transfer elsewhere, as well as the Montessori and STEM schools. Then the last step, knowing that there's a lot of open enroll-in students, we added those projected open enroll-in students for a total students and seats projection for each of our projection periods. Getting into our housing projections, then we'll get into our enrollment projections afterwards. We project just over 3,500 new housing units in the district by 2035, about 280 per year, which is similar to what we've seen over the past couple of years. We do think that virtually all of that housing will be multiple family in nature. So new apartments, new condos, new townhomes, which we know generates lower numbers of students than new single family homes would. We do project more housing through the rest of this decade than we do in the 2030s. For several reasons. The first is the current housing shortage. There just hasn't been enough housing that's been built over the past decade or so, really since the Great Recession, to keep up with demand from the millennial generation. Also baby boomer demand over the next decade. A lot of boomers will be retiring. They may want to downsize into a condo or a townhome. Developers are also very interested in the Wauwatosa area. The several that we spoke with said that it's one of the hottest housing markets in the Milwaukee area, and people really want to live in Wauwatosa. The last is also regional job growth and accessibility. Wauwatosa is advantageously located really in the smack dab middle of the greater Milwaukee area. Folks can live there, but commute west to Waukesha, east to Milwaukee, north to Menominee Falls, south to Oak Creek and Racine and beyond. This is map 6 from our report. It's what we like to call a heat map. So the reds and orange neighborhoods, those are the neighborhoods we project the most new housing to be developed. The yellows, we project moderate amounts of new housing. And then the green, the very pale green neighborhoods, are neighborhoods in which we project no new housing through 2035. So those will look very similar in 2035 as they do today. You can see on the map, though, that the red areas where we project the most new housing are really entirely focused along the North Mayfair Road corridor. That's what happens with new housing, but we understand that what happens in existing housing also has a major impact on future enrollment in your schools. All of your single-family homes that will be on the ground in 2035 have pretty much already been built, as the Wauwatosa community is a entirely urbanized, built-out community. Therefore, we analyzed several characteristics of existing neighborhoods that help contribute to projected enrollment changes, like the percent of the population that are women of reproductive age, so age 25 to 44. These are areas in which we anticipate increasing births over the next few years. Race and ethnicity, the mixture of housing types in the neighborhood, as well as the housing age. Given all of those unique characteristics for each neighborhood, we are able to predict a unique student per housing unit ratio trajectory. So neighborhoods, and this is shown here in map 7. Neighborhoods in red, we project housing in those neighborhoods to have more students in 2035 than they do currently. And the neighborhoods in blue, we project will have fewer students in 2035 than they do currently. Getting into our actual enrollment projections, by 2035, we project an increase in enrollment of about 270 students in your district. This does assume private schooling, open enrollment out, as well as resident students choosing to be homeschooled remain at constant rates as today. It does include a constant number as well of non-resident students open enrolling into the district as of this academic year, 2023. Map 8 from our report, this shows our enrollment projections by neighborhood for all grades. So those red neighborhoods, we project enrollment increases, and those blue neighborhoods, we project enrollment decreases. For elementary schools, we project an additional 100 or so students by 2035. Due to a few current patterns continuing, like continued move-ins from outside of the district, especially of young families to your area, increasing numbers of births from millennials as of all races and ethnicities, increasing new housing construction, and then the turnover of existing single-family homes from baby boomers to younger families, really especially over the next decade or so with that one. For middle school and high school, we project enrollment at district middle schools will increase also by about 100 students by 2035, and enrollment at district high schools will increase by about 65 students by 2035. Wrapping things up here to compare our projections to building capacities of your school buildings. Before I get into some of this text, I do want to just explain what this graph means, as you'll see another from middle school and high school. This graph shows our elementary school projected enrollment with the combined elementary school building capacity of all of the elementary schools in your district. So this gray box is the target capacity of all of your elementary school buildings. And then the orange box above it is the maximum capacity. So all of your school buildings have a target capacity and then a maximum capacity. This black line here is our projected resident enrollment, and the red dashed line here is factoring in a constant number of students open enrolling in, along with those resident students. You can think of that almost as your total students and seats projection. So assuming no future changes to district elementary schools, grade groupings, attendance areas, or open enrollment, we do project that there's adequate combined capacity in district elementary school buildings to accommodate total and projected enrollment through 2035. However, there are some individual elementary schools that have some capacity issues shown here on this chart. There are current capacity issues at Eisenhower and Roosevelt, with both of those schools currently operating just slightly above their maximum capacity. Emerging capacity issues are projected at Jefferson, Madison, and McKinley by 2035, just operating slightly above their target capacities. The 4 other elementary schools are projected to remain below target capacity, including a pretty significant excess capacity at Lincoln. Looking at the middle schools, currently middle schools are operating just slightly above their target capacity. And then assuming no future changes, we project that middle schools will continue to operate between their combined target and maximum building capacities through 2035. As well as the high schools, which are currently operating between their target and maximum, we project that they will remain doing so through 2035. There are current capacity issues at both Longfellow as well as Whitman. and East High, with all three schools projected to continue operating above their target capacities, but not yet at their maximum capacity by 2035. West High is currently operating just above its maximum capacity, also projected to continue doing so through 2035. Just wrapping things up here on a couple slides. Overall, we do project stable to slightly increasing enrollment in your district, with that increase of about 270 students spread across those three grade groups. And then without building, attendance area, grade group, open enrollment changes, or anything else, projected enrollment is expected to be tested at several of your schools. Looking at school facility needs, the district is very wise and proactive to engage in a long-range facility planning effort at this time. And aside from these projections, there are several other factors to consider when deciding school facility needs, such as the condition of each school, the design, the learning environment, the site area, the location of the school relative to its neighborhood, but also relative to other schools, and the importance of nearby neighborhoods are really all critical considerations. And that wraps up my presentation and our findings. I'd be more than happy to take any questions or any comments that any of you have at the moment.
I'd open up questions to the board.
Dr. Means, I have a question here regarding prior to the study, and definitely thank you. This is very thorough. I look forward to going through the other 88 pages of the documents, but this presentation was great. The findings here, are we far off prior to this with what the expectations or the kind of hypothesis was at that time before we got to this?
I don't think this district has had this type of enrollment projection report before. So this is fascinating to us. I think you're right. I have read the full report a few times thoroughly. It is fascinating. I think all board members should have received the Wisconsin School Board Association magazine for this past month. If you haven't, you will receive it. It talks about most school districts in Wisconsin and also in the Midwest are dealing with declining enrollment. So for this report, and because I think that's the headline, the headline here is that we're not declining in enrollment. Everyone else in the metropolitan area is declining in enrollment. The projections here is that we will stay slightly above our current numbers of enrollment. That is really good news in an era where most school districts are declining. I think the challenge, and I think that's why our TOSA 2075 task force is wrestling with it now. The challenge that the board will have is trying to decide what your strategy will be from a policy standpoint with open enrollment. And what I mean by that is you can see you're at a crossroads. Do you want to continue to utilize open enrollment as an economic driver? Because that's this, and I've shared this with the TOSA 2075 task force. Open enrollment is very different from a program that we used to have in this state called Chapter 220. Chapter 220 was a social program. There's one student left in the Wauwatosa School District that's a Chapter 220 student. That student will graduate from Wauwatosa West this June. Open enrollment is an economic program. It's simply a transfer of funds. And I think on average, Mr. Brightman, we predict that it costs about $12,000, $13,000 to educate a child in the Wauwatosa School District. But we receive approximately $8,700 for an open enrollment student. So we have to start, and I hate to talk about students this way, but this is the economics of things. We have to start having the conversation of what's the cost benefit of continuing to engage in open enrollment at the level that we do. We're one of the more aggressive, if not the most aggressive school district in the state of Wisconsin when it comes to open enrollment. We have nearly 1,200 students out of our nearly 6,900 students who are open enrolled into our school system. Another, I know you didn't ask this, but you kind of opened the door, so thank you. Another component that we have to think about with open enrollment is our tuition waiver component. So this is all information that you will wrestle with in January. Tuition waiver is a component of open enrollment where if a family lives in Wauwatosa, let's just say from July through January, and then they move to New Berlin, you can then allow that family to continue in your school district as a tuition waiver family. The question is, some school districts have policies where they will say you can stay in the school district until graduation. Some will say you can stay through 8th grade. Some will say you can stay through elementary if that's where the child is currently enrolled. So what we do, in addition to accepting open enrollment students, new open enrollment students, we also continue to add to our open enrollment population through tuition waiver and not having bumpers, if you will, or guardrails, if you will, on how many additional tuition waivers you will continue to keep in the district into graduation. So that's a lot there. Mr. Phillips, you asked the question of what were we expecting? I think we are pleased with the results. But I think there are a lot of future planning component of things that this board will have to take counsel from the TOSA 2075 task force to figure out what we want to look like, what we want our footprint to look like years down the road. So I'll stop there.
Nick, thank you for this presentation and this very thorough and thoughtful report. You brought up diversity, and Dr. Means mentioned that open enrollment is, an opportunity to increase our finances here in the district. But do you think that having open enrollment as an opportunity to diversify the student body also is drawing families to Wauwatosa?
If you don't mind, I'm going to answer that one.
Okay.
We have to be clear, open enrollment is not a race-based program.
It is not, but I think it diversifies our student body.
I don't know that for sure.
Okay.
Because Chapter 220 was a race-based program.
Sure.
And we knew for a fact that that would diversify our population. When open enrollment applications come in, we don't know if the student is a student of color or a Caucasian student. We just don't know. Now, I think due to the proximity of our school district to the Milwaukee area, we know that a vast majority of our open enrollment applications are from the city of Milwaukee. But even with them being from the city of Milwaukee, it could be a Caucasian family. So I think we conflate open enrollment with racial diversity.
And I don't mean just racial diversity. I mean socioeconomic. I think if you look at the numbers, coming from a family that looked at the numbers, Wauwatosa's residency numbers do not match the demographics of our student population. To me, it's a good thing. We're diversifying our student body. But if you look at the demographics of Wauwatosa, they don't match our student demographics. So leaving me to believe that open enrollment helps diversify our student body.
Social scientists would say something a little different, Ms. Willis. They would say that Wauwatosa was one of the leaders in the Chapter 220 program. And Wauwatosa was one of there were actually 3 different versions of the lawsuit. Wauwatosa was part of the first wave of first ring suburbs that participated in the lawsuit. So there was a lawsuit within Milwaukee Public Schools to diversify and desegregate schools within Milwaukee Public Schools. Then the lawsuit said there are the first ring suburbs, Whitefish Bay, Shorewood, Wauwatosa. You have to be part of this program, and we were. And the argument that social scientists would make would say that when Wauwatosa was so invested in that program, it sent a message to families of both economic and racial persuasions that this was an open community. And so the boomerang effect of Chapter 220, some would argue, has opened up the doors for families who now want to participate through open enrollment to pursue and feel that this is a welcoming community. So I think that's where your question is going. I would say that the roots of this community being open go way back to the late 1970s.
Sure.
And our participation in 220.
When I just see numbers like 30% increase in Asian and 136% increase, maybe I don't have them right. But when I see those, very big numbers, 136% increase in just, I don't remember how many years you said, but seems like a pretty large number. I just wonder if the draw is, because it was for my family coming out of state, having a diverse student body.
So I work closely with people in the city of Milwaukee who deal with fair housing issues. And their belief is that the first ring suburbs, in particular Wauwatosa, its leadership in 220 and then being such a large player with with open enrollment was a signal to families of diverse persuasions to say, this is a community where I could possibly live in. And so our stance on being tolerant and open with those different programs has had a social impact of families feeling that they can reside here in peace and harmony.
Sure.
Yeah, and Dr. Means, if you don't mind, I might just jump in and add a couple other things. I think that, everything that you said, I completely agree with, and I think that's, reflected in a lot of the census data with, your community becoming more diverse, but also becoming younger, which is bucking the trends of pretty much everywhere else in Milwaukee as well as the state of Wisconsin. So that bodes well for the school district and for enrollment if you're becoming younger and diversifying.
To that point, also, you'd have to compare your school numbers in terms of diversity to the right group. Like if your oldest people are dominantly white, for example, that's going to throw off the entire population comparison. So we'd have to look at those numbers in a different way to really see if that 83% is in direct contrast to what we see in our school populations. You got to take out that group that doesn't have children.
Yeah, sure. And then I just had one other question. You talked about current and projected occupancy issues. I wonder if, if it's been talked about or presented to the task force to consider changing boundary lines, due to the current and projected occupancies, considering that some schools are over capacity while others are way under. I don't know, Nick, if you presented something to the task force along those lines, or Dr. Means, you and your team.
I have not.
Or you, Mr.
No.
Brightman.
We have not suggested boundary line changes, and we're continuing to have the conversation of what does this mean for our community in terms of this report. So the task force, the purpose of the task force is for them to wrestle with the data and to then bring recommendations to this board. The board then will have listening sessions and continue the conversation with the community in the spring. And then you will have to ultimately take the feedback given to you in listening sessions, take the recommendations from the task force, and then as a governing body, you'll make some decisions. I think I'll turn it over to Nick. I think there are a lot of different variations of how you can look at the map and make decisions, but ultimately you are the decision makers in terms of that type of work of boundary lines. Nick?
Yeah, and that's the I guess the beauty of our methodology and of our of this project is that our neighborhoods, like I said at the beginning of my presentation, they act as puzzle pieces, so they can be shifted and moved around to compare. What does this potentially look like? What if scenarios, things like that.
Do you offer recommendations, just having your expertise, like recommendations on boundary line changes that make sense? I mean, I know we have all the data there, but we're obviously not professionals and experts in this area. So I just wonder if you have dealt with districts in making recommendations for boundary line changes, using occupancy.
We have, typically we do follow whatever is decided by the task force or the board, based
Sure.
on, what they feel is best for their school district.
Sure. Thank you.
Well, and I think, Ms. Willis, your first question is really, so don't lose that question. In the spirit of that question, what Nick will tell you and what we've seen with other school district communities is that the board will have conversations about your values. And what do you believe is important in terms of balance, be it balance in terms of diversity, not only racial diversity, but socioeconomics. Where do you want to have schools located? So I think this is the qualitative, quantitative tension that will exist. Your first question, in the spirit of your first question, will eventually come back for this group to wrestle with and to figure out what are the values that will serve as criteria for your decision making.
Sure.
We'll go to Mr. Meyer and we'll come back to him.
So I will add to Dr. Means' emphasis that open enrollment is a financial program. And 20 years ago, as we saw 220 was winding down, a conscious decision was made to bring in open enrollment in a significant way. And I was then and was for at least 14 years a champion and a leader in advocating for increases in open enrollment. So my open enrollment history is rock solid. Now, that said, the economic bottom line and implications of open enrollment are different today than what they were 10 years ago, and even more different from 20 years ago. And we have a $7 billion deficit. So we have to consider the whole picture, because we have to be able to cash the checks that we write to pay for things. I would like to see, if it were just me, and I would suspect the 2075 committee, I would suggest it might be helpful for them to publish an additional version of this report that looks only through a resident enrollment lens, to see what is our utilization based on resident enrollment. I think that might inform us of some things. The idea here that there's not a projection of a decrease, I think the projections have always had a lot of risks to them about their certainty and whether they're going to actually come true or not. But as is said, the fact that this projection, and I think it is a reliable, valid, sensible projection, it does not predict a decrease. And that, to me, matters. Because, as Dr. Mean said, there's decreased predictions all over the place, and we don't have that kind of prediction. So that is happily stunning to me. Okay. My last input is that a failing of the projections 20 years ago. And I would like to hear from Nick on this, as far as, maybe I missed something here. But the idea of population migration has mattered anecdotally in Wauwatosa. That you say, well, how many old people do we have? Well, or how many young people? As speaking as somebody who's 67, and our youngest left high school 20 years ago, I know that many of our parent friends, colleagues, associates have left Wauwatosa. And we see, so if that somehow you can't predict forward 20 years that there's so many 35-year-olds or 30-year-olds here, and then 30 years from now, there's going to be so many, 60-year-olds and 65-year-olds. The idea that you move to Wauwatosa to put your kids in schools about the time they're 4 years old, and then about the time your kids are 19 years old, you move out of Wauwatosa. So that's a factor, and I don't know how we quantify that in and out that actually helps us for enrollment. That it's 20 years ago, it was a hidden or an unrecognized contributor to the stability of our enrollment that would happen for the next 20 years. That was not sufficiently accounted for. That young people tend to move in here, and they move in here not when the old people get to be, leave or go to retirement homes. That a lot of those old people move out very early in their elderly time or very late in their middle-aged time. So, meaning, therefore, we could actually be better off than we understand as far as resident enrollment. Thanks.
Mr. Meyer, may I ask for clarification before other board members speak? Are you asking for Roffers and Mr. Brightman and I to work on a model that would reflect what Wauwatosa would look like if we were a resident only or only a resident only district?
Well, for me, that would be helpful.
Okay.
Because that the idea of, given the economics now, that's what the numbers Dr. Means and Mr. Brightman have put forward to us about how really we should be getting more money from the state for the open enrollment students, and that our average dollar resources per student is getting to be more of a factor affecting us than what it used to be 10 years ago. That we might have some of those that might matter in a decision or a recommendation. I don't know. I do, because we've had the luxury for 20 years of this essentially limitless pool of open enrollment students. Right? We could wait till August and see if we had any open chairs, and there'll be open enrollment students on the waiting list. So we can always maintain our enrollment counts if that luxury continues for us. So to look from a total enrollment lens is a little not misleading, but it doesn't quite give the whole picture now, given the economic implications of open enrollment.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you for this report. I also have read it a couple times and find it fascinating. Shared a lot of stuff with friends too. So this is really helpful. I do have a couple questions. So around boundaries, if the board decided that, based on this report, that we would like to possibly change some of the boundaries, specifically around the elementary schools, is that something your firm would, if we voted yes, we'd like to do that, would you provide examples of where those boundaries could be moved and what the enrollment projections, how the enrollment projections would change then?
That is correct. And we've done that for several school districts we've worked with, where kind of the first round has been projections, and then the second has been attendance area shifts.
Okay. Another question. So we have our population's getting younger. So to me, I would think that we would have a even more significant increase in school enrollment. I think one of the issues is most of the housing that we're building is not family friendly. So does the firm have any recommendations? I know we're meeting with the Common Council next week, how to, encourage the building of more family friendly units, or any recommendations on how we keep encouraging young, diverse families to move here and make it affordable and make it kind of realistic. A 2-bedroom or 1-bedroom isn't super realistic for a young family.
Yeah, that's a great question, and something that we've heard from several other urbanized districts that can't build new single-family subdivisions, which is what most young families with children want to move into, especially on the fringes of the Milwaukee area and the Madison area, as well as others. Most multiple family in general just produces fewer students in single family homes, except if it's a tax credit project that's geared more towards lower moderate income families. Multiple family housing that typically also has 3-bedroom units also typically produces more students than apartments that are just 1s and 2s. But then again, that's less money that developers make off 3-bedroom units than if they do 1s or 2s. I think we've seen some communities have success with partnering with developers, either with certain financing or tax credits, to either increase density and have that increased density be, if they have maybe 100 units, but they're able to increase to 120, have those additional 20 be affordable. There are several options. It's more so, I guess, on the city and developer side of things.
My last
Can I ask a
question.
follow-up to that, please, to try to assist? Is it still the case that the young families so much so want the single-family freestanding home? I've been wondering that for years. My generation, my experience doesn't inform me what young people will want today. Do you have any, does that help you questioning with respect to that? I mean, if we had the 3-bedroom apartments, maybe we'd get more people than we would think. If young people today, if you move from downtown and you're used to apartment kind of life or condo or whatever, I just don't know. My experience doesn't inform me at all to try to understand what would happen today.
I mean, yeah, I would assume that 3 bedrooms would make it. I completely agree with Nick that we need to incentivize the developers to create
Yeah.
those units
Yeah.
for us,
Yeah.
right? I also actually heard the opposite, that our aging population isn't moving out of Wauwatosa or into those condos kind of as quickly as the city thought. So that's added to to not having enough single families in Wauwatosa. But I think that was all of my questions. Thank you.
Nick, any response or reaction to those? Have you kind of questions and comments?
I don't think I have any other comments to anyone's questions at the moment.
Dr. Witches. I'm going to go to Dr. Worley and then Dr. Wick.
Okay, so first of all, to that last line of questioning, just a comment that there is a housing coalition of community organizations in the city of Wauwatosa, and the school district has not been part of that, but maybe this report suggests that one of their current projects is to explore the possibility of a land trust as a way to create affordable family housing. So I had a couple questions to the report, and thank you so much. I'm a sociologist and a data geek, so I enjoyed reading it very much. It was very insightful. In your calculations, and not saying you have to, but just curious, any thoughts on the expected inflow of refugee populations, which is, on the rise across the U.S.? Is that something that we might see? Would be one question. And then the second one, another trend has been in terms of in suburbs like ours. I haven't seen much of it in Wauwatosa, but in other places, the tear down and replace, often with larger houses. Either of those have any kind of possible significant impact, or are they just so minimal that we really don't need to be thinking about them?
Yeah, I would say they're so minimal that, we didn't incorporate either of those into our analysis, as it just didn't seem as widespread that it would really affect the projections to any certain degree.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Dr. Wick.
I wanted to ask another question, kind of following up with Ms. Heimer-Rolland about our older population. Do you have a sense of how, at what, and I realize this wasn't at all the question we asked you, but at what point are older folks vacating their homes here in Tosa? Did you have any sense of that?
Yeah, I don't have an exact sense for Tosa, but we do know, and we've seen nationally as across the state that, boomers are living in their homes longer than previous generations have. Part of that is because they're working longer than previous generations. They're not retiring as early as, a lot of times they still have bills, or they're supporting kids or even grandkids. So they are working longer, staying in their single family homes longer. But what we have seen is once they do want to sell their single family home, they often want to stay in their community. So having that type of housing, if you have a community that just has single family homes, you'll pretty much have families that live there. You won't have young families that are just starting out that might have kids or might have a toddler or might not even be married or just getting started out. You won't have seniors living there. Having different types of housing, different sizes of housing, different costs of housing, really a diversity of housing is really how you can have generational living in your community.
Yeah, that's a really good point. And actually, my question regarding senior housing was really around whether we have affordable senior housing in this community. Because anecdotally, I do think we have people who are staying in their homes well after their children leave home. But also, if you want to stay in Wauwatosa, our condos, our new apartments are very expensive for seniors to be moving in on their fixed income. I don't know if housing cost at all was something that was factored in or considered as you were looking at everything about how that may or may not be driving any of these enrollment rates.
We did look at housing cost within, they weren't specifically broken down by neighborhood, but they were broken down by, I believe it was census tract or census block group, with housing in, I think, the northeast and southeast parts of the district were a little bit more affordable than other areas in the city.
And those are the areas we're seeing a little bit more.
Those are the areas where we're seeing a larger population aged 25 to 44, especially women aged 25 to 44, as well as some slight increases in enrollment over the past few years.
Yeah, it's interesting. I mean, again, this is just sort of anecdotal, but I live in the Lincoln neighborhood, and houses in Lincoln or in the Lincoln catchment area are selling for over $1 million when they sold for less than half of that a decade ago. And I just wonder how much of the drive for housing in Tosa is just pushing people out who would otherwise move in with young children, but they can't afford to live in certain parts of the community anymore.
Right.
One of the questions that I wanted to ask about was the private school enrollment in this community. And I apologize because I read this through very thoroughly when we first got it a couple of months ago, and I don't see it now easily, but I recall seeing something in here about the number of students who were Wauwatosa residents who attend a private school. Do you recall any of that information? I'm curious if there are certain trends or any kind of information that we can glean about where our residents may be attending school, if there are certain pockets of our community where we're losing students to either private schools or open enrolling out of Wauwatosa.
Yeah, and unfortunately, we don't have that granular of data for resident students attending private schools. But what we did look at was private school enrollment trends over the past decade. So private schools that are located within the district, they actually decreased by about 91 students over the past decade. So there are about 14 private schools operating within the district that we looked at. But then we also looked at about half a dozen that were located in close proximity to the district, but in the Milwaukee Public School District. And then including those schools, enrollment essentially remained stable at all of those private schools.
And one thing I would say is the two schools that had the large increase, I believe, are Milwaukee choice charter schools. So I suspect a large number of that population at Pilgrim Lutheran and Kingdom Prep would be non-Wauwatosa resident students.
I thank you, Dr. Jessup Anger, for that. That's another highlight and headline from this report that I think we should recognize. Our market share for resident families who have school-aged children, they're choosing the public schools in an overwhelming number. And a lot of communities cannot make that statement. The other thing that I would just mention to you is that when you consider the volume of private schools that we have in this community, to hold our own and have such a strong market share is something that we should be proud of. I think we need to continue to figure out why, and make sure that we keep those families satisfied that are choosing the public schools. But I think it's another highlight.
Those are all my questions. Thank you.
Nick, I had a couple. This is Eric Jessup-Banger. I'm really curious. The Mayfair corridor seems to me to be one of the most complicated spaces because of the majority of development is happening along that window within the district. And we've got kind of the Underwood, Eisenhower, Madison schools that kind of ring that general area where a lot of the development is projected to occur. And the questions I had, one of the things that often has surprised me is how small the Underwood attendance zone is in terms of square blocks. Each time I look at it, it's much smaller than I would expect for that. And I think we've got fewer resident students at Underwood than I would like to have right now. One of the things I'm curious about, if we were to drill down into those areas, if you could do any deep dive into kind of that, anything additional that you can share that you would highlight from the report, particularly for the community who may not have a chance to go in, of what we're looking at. I know even with a lot of apartments maybe being built in that corridor between Mayfair Collection down through that window, I know it's a small number of students per unit, but what are we looking at? Because it would seem that you're projecting the majority of new students that we have will be in that attending one of those schools.
Yeah, so we do project, I think it's about 70% or 60 some percent of our new housing units are projected in that Mayfair corridor, including Eisenhower, McKinley, and Underwood Elementary School. So really the kind of southwestern third part of the district. I think it's a combination of factors that are resulting in enrollment increases at those schools. Definitely the new housing development. If you have 70% of 3,500, so about 2,000 new housing units in that corridor, a rough estimation would be about 100 students coming from those 2,000 multiple family units. But there's also turnover of existing housing, particularly single family homes in those neighborhoods. I think neighborhood 53 was one of those that we had identified would be a major turnover neighborhood. So yeah, that's the neighborhood just south of Underwood and west of Mayfair Road and north of Blue Mound Road. Some of the McKinley neighborhoods, we had also projected some enrollment increases due to turnover of single family homes in those neighborhoods. Also, there's a lot of projected new housing in the Mayfair Mall area for redeveloping the mall. Does that answer your question, or?
I think so. That's helpful.
Okay.
To me, there's more land on the west side of Tosa that's not residential housing, and so there's more opportunities and more activity, and so that it's kind of one of the things I found really enlightening about the report is I learned so much about what development plans are going forward from little nuggets kind of buried throughout the report. Clearly, you did your homework, and that was really, I think, for me, enlightening, and I suspect others will be as well.
Great. Yeah, the city was a fantastic resource. We met with them in person for, I think, a 2-hour meeting, and then had several additional communications afterward with them.
Standing. Any final board questions on this item? Mr. Brightman, anything that you wanted to highlight? As I know you and Dr. Means have been really digging into this report. Dr. Means, I think, have mentioned on several occasions that he's read it upwards of 30 times.
I think I believe that actually, but no, I think my big takeaways are First of all, the report looks pretty absolute. So you see 273 students over the next 10 or 12 years. That seems like a pretty hard number. I think when I look at these projections, it's better to kind of squint at those, and the stable to slightly increasing, I think, is a better way to look at this type of thing. Because any projection, the further out you get, the less reliable it is. That's just the way the projections work. But as we've said, there's been a lot of work and background work done to the projections. And we're confident that it gives us a good indication that at least we're stable to that slightly increasing. I think we can count on that with the resident population within our district.
Dr. Means, any final closing thoughts?
I think your questions were outstanding as a governing board. And rest assured that the task force is wrestling with this information right now. They will bring forth recommendations, but then the work becomes yours. And I think you've made a commitment that you're going to have listening sessions around this information, and then eventually you will have to make some governance grounded decisions. I think what Mr. Meyer modeled this evening would be very helpful as you continue to think about this data. If there's certain models you want us to start mocking up with Nick and his team, we can do so. But please let either Mr. Brightman or I know what those mock-ups look like. The last thing I would say is, I think it was the first question that Ms. Willis asked, we have to come back to it. And Roffers has worked with other school districts who have wrestled with what you're going to have to wrestle with. And that is, so what's your values criteria? And I would call it that. And Nick and I have briefly had a conversation around this. What criteria are you going to use to make some of these decisions? And what values, and it has to start with your values. What values are you going to lead with it? There are some school districts that, as they start talking about redrawing boundary lines, they're looking at what's the percentage of the free and reduced lunch students in one area, and how will it shift and change the composition of a school attendance zone area. Those are the types of value criteria discussions you're going to have to really come to grips with as you dive into this more. So I think the question was posed to us earlier. Have we had this type of information before? No. And I think it's going to allow us to make more informed decisions that ultimately the board has to make moving forward.
Can I make one short comment, please? What strikes me here is the importance of the difference between a 2-bedroom apartment and a 3-bedroom apartment. And that for the values we have as a school district about, well, number one, we need resident students. Number two, we need diversity and inclusion. Advocacy, maybe for our legislative advocacy committee with the city about their influence on the type of housing stock they are promoting in their role in city planning. I just assumed that we build all these apartments over on the west side, there's going to be some kids show up in there. But now I hear, well, maybe not if it's a 1-bedroom or a 2-bedroom, because they're looking for those 3-bedroom ones, and how many of those are we building? So that's my big eye-opener takeaway here from the whole thing.
I think just one last thing to add to that, and to Jenny's point there, when you talk about the economics of it, the cost of living isn't going down here. Our community is only increasing until we have something that occurs. Hopefully it doesn't, economically as a nation. When you get to those 2- and 3-bedroom apartments, those rents are going to probably be considerably higher than it would be for somebody to go and find a smaller home someplace else, whether it's West Dallas or Oak Creek or someplace else. And so we have to take that into consideration. The socioeconomic, levels, when we start talking about values, the people that come to move into the neighborhood can afford. And not saying that, this should be a closed door neighborhood where you can't, we only want a certain type of people, but you get priced out. And I mean, we've got friends personally that, had smaller houses that lived right off North Avenue, sold their home. It went fast, couldn't get back in. They live in Menominee Falls now. They don't want to live in the Falls. They've been trying to fight back in for 6 years. And I think that's something that we have to really look at and think about as well when we start talking about legislative advocacy, because I think it's a bigger, broader picture when it comes to Realtor Association data, but then the economic value of our homes. Jenny hit it right on. I'm looking at houses on either side of me that I have no kids on my block, on my side of the street, right in the village. and there's 3 houses, they're all 85 plus. And they're not planning on leaving until literally someone kicks the bucket.
Well, and the irony is, the better school district we are, the more in demand the homes are and the higher the prices go.
That's right.
So I don't know what we do about that. You know, our own success starts to put a ceiling on some things.
It does. And I said, I think it becomes a conversation of, and I know people don't like to talk about it inside of our community, no matter what side it's on. But you look at those examples like Naperville, Illinois, that grow extremely fast. Their schools go with it, and the schools go up in quality. The community as a whole, its basic foundation hasn't changed, but the quality of their schools, the quality of the education, the quality of their community increases. There's a cost associated with that. And those are things that we'll have to govern through when we start looking at things to Jessica's point. You know, we get into the race and ethnicity data, the population change data from decade to decade. What's that look like? I get very interested in hearing that there's one of the pages in here that kind of breaks down a lot of the ethnicities in there. When you look at the increases, the decreases, you start looking at the major numbers. You know, I look at, you know, the no longer standalone individual ethnicities, but when we start looking at 2 or more races, we start looking at census data, because now we actually have categories where people are more apt to say it's not just clear-cut black and white anymore. 2 or more races means a lot of things. And how you identify those things, you know, it's all dependent on your household, who you are. You know, the things that are, you know, either going to be coming into your favor or not into your favor. I know some people that won't choose that because they believe there's benefits elsewhere. And so I think there's a lot of those things that we have to have dissect and slice and dice to really have an understanding of what do the big pictures look like. But again, wrapping it around to what are those values that come with that?
Dr. Worley.
Keep it short. Mine's a process comment, which is as we look at in the future getting feedback, that we make sure those sessions engage people who are currently tuition waiver, open enrollment, people who might be excluded by decisions if that was to go in that direction. And I think, of course, we'll say to everyone, come, you know, be there, but just really make sure that we've got that in our, to hear from those folks what their thoughts are on the decision-making process. For example, the family, you know, a family that might have not been able to get back in the district still actually could be sending their children here, but they may be very committed to the city and to the district. So I just want to make sure in our process that we're really bringing those populations into the conversation, so we get a full 360 view of those values and norms that we're looking at setting down.
For a tuition waiver student, so it's a student who has moved out of the district but was in the district previously and is choosing to continue in the district, what is the amount we get per student in that case?
They're an open enrollment student.
That's what I thought.
But they don't have to go through they don't get on the lottery. They kind of get is that how it works? Do they get like?
They get to stay in their school.
Okay.
And so let's use, did I call you Mr. Phillips at some point today?
It's possible.
Sorry, Mr. Forrest. So let's take his example of a family who sold their home. They can't buy a new home in the community, so they live in Menominee Falls. They want to stay in the Wauwatosa School District. They can become an open enrollment tuition waiver family. The family would be responsible for driving their students from Menominee Falls to the schools that they were attending when they lived here. That happens quite often here.
So you say there's no different in open enrollment student tuition waivers, but did they get some sort of preference? Because I know we don't have capacity for open enrollment students in the secondary school. So do they lose that spot, or why are they guaranteed that spot?
We have the option of allowing them and giving them preference. So let's assume that they're a 6th grader right now. They moved during their 6th grade year. Yes, we create a new open enrollment or tuition waiver spot for that then incoming 7th grader the following year.
I know, because we've discussed this in the policy committee, that I thought you could not have preferences. You know, we've talked about staff members having preference over getting their students into Wauwatosa, and I know.
Yeah, I want to be careful. I wouldn't call it a preference, but we have the ability to accept that student. I guess it is a preference. We have the ability to accept that student as an open enrollment student moving forward under the open enrollment law as a tuition waiver student. Now, some people may call that a preference. Others will call that the statute of open enrollment. However you identify it, that is an opportunity for that student. So let's play that out. So if the student is a sixth grader, they move to Menominee Falls during their sixth grade year, we could create in the policy a stipulation that says that they have the ability to complete their school year. We have the ability in policy to say that they can complete their middle school years, and then they have to apply for open enrollment, understanding that we typically don't have spaces at the high school level. So it's more of a policy driven issue that is governed through the statute of open enrollment.
I just think about someone who might be savvy or privileged and have the opportunity to live in Menominee Falls, buy an apartment for a month, let's say rent an apartment for a month, enroll their children. I mean, it happens. It's happened in other districts. So it kind of seems like a loophole. I mean, I want our kids to have the opportunity to stay if there are extenuating circumstances that force them to move out of our city, but I also want to be thoughtful about who those students are. Does that make sense?
I think that is a very important policy decision that the board will have to wrestle with.
And so
To that point, it could work both ways, but we don't know.
Yeah.
Maybe I am not so high in income and I own a house and I'm having trouble buying a car and my property values just shot up. I can sell my house, move to a community where the house doesn't cost so much.
Sure.
Now I can afford a car
Outside Wauwatosa.
and my kids can still go to the Wauwatosa schools. I don't know which way it works. I don't, you know what I mean? But it's to your point, we need to know which way it's cutting. If it's a loophole for the wealthy or if it's something that people who aren't so wealthy, maybe they're utilizing this. I don't know.
So a couple of things come to mind with this. One, Legislative Advocacy Committee finding a way and an opportunity to really push at, in the next state budget, changing how much one gets for open enrollment students. The home district that's sending the student keeps, my understanding is a rather sizable, it's almost a third now of that amount of money for just to cover administrative costs of sending them to Wauwatosa. So they're making revenue off this as well. If we were equalized in the amount of money that we were getting in resources for each open enrollment student as a resident student, that would certainly be beneficial to the bottom line. And then there's, I think, questions of how we've utilized open enrollment is what has worked in the past going to work in the future. And I know that's a much bigger conversation that will be informed by the work of the 2075 task force. And they're looking at the interface between open enrollment, changing demographics, school footprint, what schools are where, boundary lines, transportation, and lots of other complex things. So again, a big thank you to the community members who volunteered for that committee. And as a heads up to the board, we will be hearing from the facilitator in, I believe, October. We'll be coming in and sharing a little bit about updates as to where they are mid-process, so that we'll get a couple of those before they do their final report to us, I believe, in May. Any final questions or comments on this before we move into conversations, first reading of policies? Thank you, Nick, if you're still here, and then to Mr. Brightman and Dr. Means for pulling this forward. This has been really helpful and good information.
Thank you.
Policy Committee, do you need a few minutes to convene before
We're good. We're good. I'm going to help guide the first reading and Phil's going to help guide the second with some support from documents. If other people need a break, that's okay too.
Let's go through first reading of everything.
We might need a break.
Before the second, I may ask for a break to make sure I'm clear on some of the different policies.
Okay. So I'm going to go as they are ordered in the PDFs that are attached, if that's okay, so that it's as simple as possible, hopefully a little more simple than we had it for our tech support the last time as well. Does that make sense to everyone? So that means we're starting with 5120, which is actually a good one to start with, given the conversation we've just had. And so this is a first reading. We pulled this one last time because what we had put on the meeting materials was not exactly it had a piece and a couple sentences and it was not what we intended. There've been some, as I will mention that our policy committee has turned over completely and some people worked on this. Jess and Jenny were on it before, and now Phil and I are on it, and this was a policy that we picked up and continued to work on. So I really want to bring, as we look at this, I really want to bring your focus to the reason it's here before us right now is due to the instability that some families are feeling who move inter-district. We've just been talking about the exit, but the families that move within the district and wish their students to be able to continue the traditional progression that they started in, meaning that they want their children to be able to go from perhaps elementary to middle to high school with the same neighborhood people that they originally had. This is not required that they would do this. This policy does not say you have to when you move. It says you have the option. It doesn't say it now, but that's the goal here. And so I will mention that there's quite a bit more to look at in this policy, especially after the 2075 task force, and especially some of the things we were just talking about. And there may be also, I would suggest as a policy committee member, some ways to perhaps make some of the language a little simpler. It's a pretty challenging policy to read and to be sure what it's actually saying. And I've had people ask me about that. Just kind of take a look at what we're really trying to do is to address that right now. And again, this is the first reading, so we're here to get some comments. Right now, if someone moves within the district, their children can finish out in the school that they're in. But then there's the expectation is that they will then move, let's say they move to the west side, but they were on the east side, then the expectation is that they would go to Whitman and west instead of to Longfellow east. Dr. Means, am I getting that out and clear and reflecting? Okay. So this is, when we looked at it and talked about it, we don't see this as impacting a lot of people, but it is definitely a difference compared to what somebody who moves out of district currently can do. And so to try to equalize that and make it so that people who stay in Wauwatosa but shift sides of the city have the same access that somebody who moves completely out of Wauwatosa does in progression to schools. So that's what we're really looking at tonight. There's nothing that we're looking at that would change boundaries, attendance areas, as a matter of fact for the school district as a whole.
This policy, it's the first three paragraphs to start the policy. The first three paragraphs have come forward because a parent in the community very effectively and in a very cooperative way engaged the board and myself and stated that this seems to be a blind spot in the policy. I think it's ironic that we just discussed the tuition waiver language, because technically, as it stands right now, a tuition waiver student would have more rights to continuing the pathway of their schooling than a family who moves from one side of town in Wauwatosa to another side of town in Wauwatosa. So this is just an attempt to ensure that let's just use the example, if a family lived in the Underwood attendance area, but they moved to the Roosevelt attendance area, that family could continue Underwood, Whitman, West. Right now, the policy doesn't explicitly give them that right to continue.
I have a question. I appreciate, okay, so we also had the conversation around kind of the heftiness of this document, but, decided with Dr. Zeman and Dr. Means that it was important because these things need to be spelled out pretty explicitly. with that being said, some of the language was changed, I think that Dr. Hoyt and I worked on, and I just want to address that. I think it's still included, but so one of the conversations that we had and some parents had approached us about is if their student starts at Lincoln, but then they move to, then they get the following year they're able to go to Madison. The policy before stated that then they'd have to go back to Longfellow and they couldn't continue to Whitman. But I think the language in here, though a little different than what we had put, says that all requirements that apply, this is the last sentence of the document, all requirements that apply to transfers between high schools as described previously in the policy also apply to open enrollment, student intra-district transfer requests. It just does not speak about middle schools, right? Because we had that conversation with Dr. Zimmerman that if we have capacity at Madison, then we should also have capacity at Whitman. Because what we were finding is, families were trying to get all the siblings into the same school, and maybe the first sibling had to start at an East Side or West Side school, vice versa, but then had to go a different pathway than their siblings, even though they were accepted into the respective area. They had to go to the different middle school, even though they're accepted into the new pathway. Does that make sense?
Sort of. So these folks who are getting in, they're actually moving their residency.
So I'll give you an example specifically. So there's a family at Jefferson who has 4 kids at Jefferson. The oldest started at Underwood, but then the second year that student was in Wauwatosa, there was an opening at Jefferson. So the first daughter got in. So now all 4 siblings are at Jefferson, but the one who was at Underwood for 1 year for JK has to now go the Whitman West route, while her siblings, because they enrolled at Jefferson, will go the Longfellow East route. It was super confusing. But what our conversation was, if we accept them at Jefferson, even the second year, then we should accept them knowing that we have a seat for them to continue along the same pathway. They'll go to school with their friends from elementary to middle to high school. So that language just isn't in here as we had presented it before. And I can find.
So my perspective has always been 2 things. Keep families together so that it's not a hardship on the parental people to get the kids to school. And that also facilitates things about the older child being able to keep an eye on the younger child before now. It's all kind of good stuff, the idea that we keep families together. The other thing which we haven't so much promoted is keeping children with their friend cohorts.
Their peers.
Yeah. And, example, divorce, the family owns a home, divorcing, now you have 2 single divorced parents. Each of them has to maintain their own household. They can't afford to each buy a home. So now they look for rental property. The only rental property available is in a different elementary district. And it was long ago that it was the discretion of the building principal to let you stay. But I would rather it be our practice that, aligning with what it seems that we're trying to do here, that the students can stay with their friends. There's a lot of bad outcomes from separating students from their cohorts, from their,
Yeah, or their families.
Yes,
At the secondary level.
both.
Yep.
So I would rather than, no, it's a noble objective and I support it to try to write specific practices in here. But I would also like to see a general statement of those objectives. That in case we miss something, we forget something,
Sure.
in the discretion of the superintendent, if we somehow forgot to mention something.
Maybe in the administrative guidelines, I think, of
Right.
why
Okay.
as we
Yeah.
are making this policy. And just to give another example, so I have there's a Jefferson family who the daughter started at a West Side Elementary School, but then went to Jefferson and was able to continue to Longfellow because they have seats, but now she's projected to go to West because West has a smaller enrollment. So I think we just have not had policy that outlined.
Now, there's also,
Am I right?
West is not right. I'm just wondering if that's, because is this for open enrollment that you're talking?
Yeah.
Okay, so if you look on page 4, I can see, I think this is what we struck under D and E,
Okay.
but it doesn't, so it basically strikes out that wherever you were originally assigned, you have to follow that track,
Yeah.
which is how it was before. D is for middle school.
We didn't undo what, as we weren't even presented with what you all specifically did or with this particular example. So that wasn't part of our discussion. We really only looked at taking up the piece about inter-district.
The thing with board docs, there were so many working documents. It's specifically around this policy. I think we were presented with this, I think from Luke and his team for the first time. So some language changed after that. So I think there are multiple drafts, unfortunately, of this policy, and sometimes things get omitted, like what happened the first time with this document. Things were added that were not supposed to be in there. So I just don't see the explicit language that our committee had put that says that, open enrollment students who change schools will be allowed to continue along that pathway, assuming that the district will approve that transfer, assuming that there is a seat for them at the secondary level. So that
Okay,
makes
so
it
that clarifies. That's why I asked you this was resident. This was an open.
non-resident.
Okay,
These are non-resident.
Okay, that helps.
Yeah, I'm
That's
gonna-
where I was getting confused.
I'm going to make a request since this is exactly why we have two readings on stuff, which is
Sure.
great. That Jessica and or Jenny, if you can get together, take a look at the policy as it was previously. Attend or share or either share with Dr. Means for presenting at the policy committee meeting or attend the next policy committee meeting. And take a look at that. Ultimately, it's your call as the current policy committee co-chairs of what you want to bring forward for the second reading. If you don't agree with that, we can amend here. My preference would be we figure it out before it comes back. And so that the board can see it in writing, so we're not amending it in the meeting. But if that work can be done of the sausage making of sorts of the policy at the policy committee meeting, I don't have any opinion really either any way on this, other than I would love for the conversation to occur and for whatever comes back to be reflective of a recommendation from the committee.
I do think it's a little important that we have, I'd like to know how the full board feels. Like, I appreciate
You
that.
heard what,
Yeah,
I'm the
Mr.
general
Meyer-
principal. The details,
Support
I
it.
don't want to get cornered in by a detail. I want
Yeah.
families to stay together, and I want friends to be able to stay together for the children. Are some people going to game it? I don't doubt it, but we got to worry about the kids. That's where I am.
So I think a brief comment from everyone saying whether they support that or not would be helpful in myself getting together with the current policy committee to kind of give them direction, because that was a direction Dr. Hoig and I were going in, but that is not reflective of the full board.
I think so.
Okay.
I asked a question like that once, and our lawyer came running to the front saying I couldn't ask that was polling the board.
Oh,
I know
okay.
what you're trying to
Okay,
fight.
Nobody say anything.
I know. I'm just trying to say, it's
All right.
like, sorry, I didn't mean to do anything
Maybe
wrong.
just send your opinions individually to the policy committee? No, you can't do that either. Okay, never mind.
And-
I'm gonna shut up. I mean, Dr. Means, that's what I meant.
Yes.
And Dr. Means, please just assure that it's noticed that a quorum of the board will be attending, which is perfectly fine. We can do that, but we could just got to notice it. Yeah.
Thank you for that direction, Mr.
A policy committee has not seen the different renditions that you all worked on.
Okay.
So
To be clear, are you talking about open enrollment students?
that's what I was trying to
Non-resident
clarify.
students.
I was trying to clarify that.
I think the language that's been brought forth today is regarding resident students. I think the open enrollment policy, and I'm making eye contact with Mr. Pinion. We know we have a lot of inter-district transfer conversations that need to happen with non-resident students. Working that through and looking at that language is something that we still need to do. That's why I was listening to you closely, Ms. Willis, in terms of our resident or non-resident. The first three paragraphs of 5120 that's before you this evening was brought to us by a resident who really struggled with the fact that they moved from one part of Wauwatosa to another part, but they were denied the ability to stay on the matriculation path that they started when they lived in a previous area of the community. That's the totality of what's being brought forth to the board this evening.
Well, I do think to Dr. Hoyt's point, if you read E, some of the language is struck, but there's not clarity, right? So
I do think we did that.
we did strike that.
I think there's some of this.
D has under open enrollment students actually has what you were talking about.
D and D. So if you read that
Yeah.
correct language, that however the students, it used to say that the student's middle and high school assignment is based on the original elementary school. But I thought we had more clarifying language again, because we talked about.
Yeah, I don't know if we did.
I don't think, we didn't touch anything else from what you
We didn't
did.
change anything. Yeah.
The only thing that was touched is the first three paragraphs at the beginning of 5120. So whatever else is here is work that's
That's what I did.
or you,
May I?
Mr. Opinions to blame here.
As the individual who is often looking at this policy, approving every or denying inter-district transfer requests, approving tuition waivers, the way I'm reading your current language is the third paragraph on top in green is specific to residents, right? Because it spells that out and right away in the beginning of the sentence. And then when I get to D and E with what you've stricken in those lines or struck, it reads to me as though that is now also applicable to our open enrolled students.
Yeah, I just believe that we had a statement that said that the same process used for resident students will be used for non-resident students. Like I'm almost certain we had that kind of statement, right? Just to provide clarity.
We didn't, so I don't, this current policy committee didn't change anything from your
Well, I'll
language.
happily, like the president's suggestion, I'll look through my notes and it'll be helpful.
That'd be great.
No, may I say,
Yes.
I 100% support the concept. And before we actually do something, we have to check with Dr. Means and Mr. Pinion that we aren't creating an administrative nightmare and we need a transition period or something like that, that we don't just fell swoop clobber them with something that they can't make work.
Sure,
As a
absolutely.
practical matter, but I 100% want your objective. I don't think we should treat any family differently from another family, whether they're resident or non-resident. No, I don't doubt the whole board agrees with that. But we got to get there as fast as we can. And so, okay, thanks.
Yeah, I don't want to labor this point, but I will happily meet with the policy committee to share the information that I had.
And I think that request also, what I hear you saying, Mr. Meyer, is that it would also be informative to all of us as board members to know what impact,
Yeah.
the quantity of impact this would have, so that we, not that you can specifically maybe figure that out, but just a sense of what the impact is.
I mean, is one elementary school going to lose a critical number of students and another elementary school then get more than they have chairs for, literally? We need to know whether we're doing that. And if we want to do that, then we have the power to do that, but we need to resource them in order to make it work. That's all I'm saying. Okay.
Okay. Are we ready for the next first read? Anything else? Yes.
So where do you stand as a body in regards to the first three paragraphs? Because in terms of substance of what's being presented to the board tonight, that was the core of what this policy committee was bringing forward. And again, that it was to address the request of a community member.
And 5120 will come back, especially after the 2070.
So if you're okay with those first three paragraphs, I don't.
Mr. Pinion, is this something that's sort of pressing for you to get passed or not passed?
I'm not stressing this decision. I think you.
I didn't know if there was
Nope.
like pending decision.
No, there's nothing pending. I mean, we're still operating within the
Okay.
old policy. I will, for frame of reference, kind of give you the information that there is a precedence here to keep families together whenever possible. And a lot of times when an IDT or interdistrict transfer comes through now and in years prior, and they're asking to switch, space is certainly looked at. And in our guidelines, there are different thresholds, and the thresholds are higher when there's a sibling attending as well. So there's more opportunity, and we're generally very successful at keeping families together historically. So it's not as pressing or stressful, but I appreciate you asking.
And I just want to say, we talked a lot about, obviously, these policies haven't been updated, but practice versus policy. Policy directs us to split families up, to put them at the high school that matches where they started, but not necessarily practice, right? But that's why it was important for us to get this updated.
I also think the families that are looking at this are looking for some more predictability, and the policy would give more predictability. And for example, one of the cases we were presented with, the question was, or could be, would I move out of Wauwatosa or would I move to the west side in order to get what I wanted? Like this is an east-west west move, right? And so I do think, even though implementation right now is making probably positive and fair decisions for these families, many of them would want more predictability. So that it's not like a tomorrow crisis, but it's definitely impacting people's decision making.
I was in the spot once where I had to make a decision to move, where I was going to move, before there was time to find out whether the administrator would grant the exception.
Yes, yeah.
I needed certainty when I was looking at the rules to know what I had, because I couldn't take the chance on it going the wrong way. I'm agreeing, I'm trying to add my anecdotal personal experience to that. It's important we give people certainty.
And if our value is to keep families together, then the policy should be moving in that direction.
Let's move on to the next policy.
Now we're going to go back to the zero series to policy 0144.5, board member behavior code of conduct. And again, this was one that was worked on by the previous policy committee. We reviewed that. We did not opt to make significant changes to that. But in highlighted in green, you will find what the proposed changes are. And again, this is a first read, so we look for any comments or thoughts or questions of what we should be considering. So I'll just read under general expectations, D, make every reasonable effort to protect the integrity and promote the positive image of the district and one another. Criticize privately, praise publicly, never embarrass each other or the district. That's some added language. And then under board member communication, email communication by board members shall be in accordance with bylaw 067.5, use of electronic mail. Specifically, responses to questions posed by members of the public shall be brief, factual responses only, with a concurrent copy of the response sent to the superintendent. And I believe that we have a comment on that from one of our board members who would like to, would you like to take your conversation piece up next? Sorry, or we can wait. We can have other people comment too, because what you have is, yeah, okay.
So I have two comments on this policy, but in relation to the email communication. So I would like to propose that we don't just respond to the superintendent, but that we would include all board members in the responses. And this is kind of a couple of things led me to this. So a lot of times we'll get individual community members emailing every individual board member. And that creates a lot of confusion if board members unintentionally say things that aren't the same. It also, we had an example of this maybe last weekend. It's a lot of back and forth between us and the superintendent, or us and the staff person who would know the answer to the community members' questions. So just so that it kind of keeps our communication on the same page, of course, because of quorum, we wouldn't respond to all. So similar to how we get informational emails from the president, it's just kind of an FYI, Dr. Means is already working on this issue, or whoever it really should go to in the district. We would all know that is getting sort of taken care of, or at least that somebody in the district is working on getting that community member an answer. I think it's also just transparency. We all kind of know what's important to community members. I asked Dr. Means to work with Ms. Ellis on communicating this to our community if it passes. And I also, did you find out the texting question? Okay, so yeah, ask Dr. Means to see how texting would work on this, because it's sort of like informal communication, so.
Legal counsel is concerned that we only recognize electronic mail as a source of communication in today's environment with text messaging and whatever new technology will emerge. It's better to have a more broad definition of communication.
They would like us to broaden that.
Yes.
So they would include text messages in
Yes,
this.
ma'am.
My other kind of, I don't want to say concern, was I think it kind of puts a weird dynamic between the board and the superintendent if we're sort of needing the superintendent's oversight to how we're communicating either with staff or with the community. I think that's a weird dynamic that most governing boards would not have their sort of executive copied on all of their outgoing email.
And so Dr. Means, did you want me to share what you said about that, or do you want to share it yourself?
I can
We
share
had this
it.
conversation too, so.
So I think it's appropriate for, if you're going to include the entire board and the superintendent, that makes sense. And I think, so your recommendation is to not just have it as the superintendent alone, but if it's the entire board and the superintendent. And I think the reason, I think I've shared it with everyone. I don't want to read your emails. I don't like, I would prefer not to be included, but there are components of a community member's email that is then directing or have questions around operations, or things that we can answer immediately. It's appropriate for, it cuts out one less email that the board has to then say, Dr. Means, here's that we would like you to address or your team needs to address. So I've been in school districts where actually it's the school board and the superintendent are included in the communication to a community member. I think the comment that was raised, I'm more concerned about making sure that the community understands that if they email school board member 1, that the response is going to be including school board members 2 through 7 and Dr. Means.
That was one of my questions to this suggestion, that, and the second, the risk level for walking forum is going to take a lot of self-control for
And the
board
board will
members
have to
not to
demonstrate
direct
this-
each other
Yep.
in our responses, but just to let those responses sit there.
Yes.
Those were two things that concern me.
Can I just point my other point on? And then I also I don't know how necessary the addition to D is to this policy. I don't know that we should direct each other how we should necessarily.
And I would turn that back to Jess and Jenny, because they were the ones who proposed this.
And I just thought F through H kind of covers, we're honest, we're credible, we're truthful. I think all of that kind of takes care of what D would.
My memory's not great on this one, actually.
I would be most comfortable with D if we put a period after the word district in the first line.
Maybe some context too that we learned, and Phil, correct me if I'm wrong, was that this is not a typical statement in yellow documents. But we, again, were very new to this and felt that you all had worked hard and didn't want to undo what you had worked on.
Mr. Meyer.
My first comment is that I don't think any board can legislate good judgment. That's a hard road to go down. Good judgment is desirable. So with respect to D, well, you're kind of asking to get brought before a federal judge, to tell you the truth. So, Dr. Worley, when you say this is not in the usual Neola package, that might be why. Okay, so I'm trying to be constructive here. I have a year and a half left on the board. I'm kind of getting to the point where things we do are not going to so much affect my work. It's going to affect the work of the people who come after me. And what I've learned is that different political opinions, which is fair, we're elected, we're political beings. What's reasonable, what's agreed upon changes every few years. And so sometimes this disagreement stuff is just the nature of the job we have and how we're chosen in the constitutional structure we live in. And there's going to be some things we just don't like. But 5 years ago, maybe those things were okay, or vice versa. Okay, that's it. Now, with respect to the copy the email to the superintendent. How many times in my years have people said to me, I'm going to tell you something and don't tell the superintendent? And I say, there are no secrets from the superintendent because he's the one who fixes things. So I can't be having some undermining the superintendent going on here. So in that sense, any email I send to CC the superintendent, sure. But now we go to what Dr. Means said. How many emails do we want Dr. Means to get? And then I go back to my comment, can we legislate good judgment? As a board member, I don't tell Dr. Means everything somebody tells me. I need to try to exercise some judgment about whether it's something all this stuff, what does my boss need to know? I want him to hear it from me before he hears it from somebody else. What does our chief executive officer need to know? I need to exercise some judgment that I don't inundate him with a lot of stuff that he doesn't need to know about. And then the open meetings law question, I think we are putting ourselves way out on a limb here that, I can say specifically, I don't know what your answer is going to be there. If we can claim that, well, I read it, but I didn't really do anything with it. Think of all the major decisions we might have coming up in 2 years where there's going to always be a significant group a significantly sized group in the community that's going to be pretty strongly opposed, and they're going to be looking for any way to overturn what we do. And that's fair. That's how the system works. And now every board member email has gone to the whole rest of the board. And now you're subjecting that to a judgment call by a court on whether that constituted something that becomes a walking forum. Do we really want to invite that exposure to those questions? That's my input.
And I think one of as we were talking about this specific policy, when Jessica and I were talking about this, I think one of the things we really recognized was that as a board, we are way over responding in emails. We're sharing our opinions. We're giving families sometimes feedback about, that's a great thought. I'll bring that up. There's way too much happening. And really what this policy suggests is that all of that is really, really condensed to, these are the facts. We're talking about this on Monday. It's on the agenda. You can come or leave a comment, or you should be talking to Mr. Pinion about that. Here's his email address. I know. And so I think if we were serious about that and strict about that, the chances of us having any issues with kind of a walking quorum or things like that would be much, much reduced. The other thing we could consider, and I know a lot of other districts are doing it, which is the only person who is communicating back to say message received, we received your email, assuming that messages are coming to the full board, is the board president. So the board president will speak for the, I know, I'm so sorry.
Yeah, but you need.
Make it up.
That'd be you're saying they're doing it to the community comment and public comment.
Or people are doing what they email to us when you can see that we've all received the same email and we've all been CC'd on it. Instead of each of us individually responding to that person, however you might respond.
No, and just to add to my comment, before the 6 of you were on the board at one time said to Jamie Price, set up our email so that we cannot email to each other because it was a problem. So, what I said about different eras of boards and opinions, it's like just hear the historical record there that this very thing was thought to be such a hazard. We absolutely forbid it. technically, electronically, that I couldn't do an email to other board members for a short, didn't last long, but just to say, and I didn't like that either, because I wanted to be able to if I emailed to one person to say a question, why can't I do that? But I got limited there too, anyway.
I mean, I feel like we've gone so far the pendulum has swung so far in the other direction that we can't even email each other to say, are you available to come to this meeting on the 28th? And we have to route everything through Dr. Means. I don't know if people in the community recognize that that's how we're functioning, but it's incredibly burdensome and dysfunctional that we have taken the open meetings laws to such an extreme that we are doing things that are actually taking up our superintendent's time that we are paying him to be a much smarter, more effective person than that.
I'm going to ask the boss. Jamie, we're getting I think there's a few folks who are not possibly on mute on WebEx. We're getting some feedback in the room.
I'm sorry.
I think there's maybe a few folks who are on WebEx who are not on mute. And we're, I think, hearing a few things randomly in the room.
That was me. That was my dogs. I'm sorry.
Jamie, we can hear your dog.
Bless you, Jamie, for all of this sneezing.
No worries. So a couple of thoughts. One, I think it is unfortunate sometimes when somebody may email all the board individually, trying to find out where we all individually stand. What is, for me, really dangerous is when then they email other board members where they are literally the linchpin in saying, here's how Mike Meyer is going to vote on this. Are you going to vote on this? I talked to all the board and 3 of them said this and 4 of them said that. Where do you stand? And I think that's really,
And that's coming with the tough decisions we have. People are going to be microscoping us. Yeah.
So I will say as the current sitting board president, the idea of me responding to all of them doesn't sound awesome. And I'm happy to respond to many. The thing I have appreciated when people have CC'd me as board president on emails that folks have gotten is that then I am aware that they've already been responded to. I often CC Dr. Means anytime it's an operational issue, which honestly is the vast majority of emails I get, which is me directing the individual to, here's the right person to talk to. I'm not that person, and here's the limits of my role, and I need to stay in my lane. And then I also think some people have just sometimes asked questions that I am responding always as a board member, but I'm also coaching them on how to navigate a complex system. So it may be something really personal. It may be somebody who maybe I know them as a parent, and I'm encouraging them to go talk to a principal or something else. And I feel like there would be a violation, and it's all public record, but they're also emailing me, and I feel like there's a difference between me responding with 6 colleagues and Dr. Means versus me responding and saying, I can't fix this problem, but here's the folks who can, and that feels more humane. So all these things are kind of in my mind. This is another one where, Mr. Meyer, I would agree. I think there's norms that we can create as a board outside of norms of practice as we kind of cohere how we operate that we might do in an in-service in kind of some good practices. I do worry a little bit about the walking quorum, how we wander into that. I don't know if it's a walking quorum, but it's muddy. And I'd rather avoid muddy whenever we can. So I'm okay with kind of recommending recommendation of any operational items that we are CCing Dr. Means, so that he's aware of it. But I don't like the idea of CCing the full board.
I guess, so could we just not say that we're going to CC the superintendent in all of our emails? Say it's brief, factual responses only.
And as
Period.
appropriate, CCing the superintendent.
So just take that.
If I could throw a consideration. So go ahead. I'm sorry.
Yeah, I mean, that takes away Dr. Means getting all of your rights. I think I can speak for myself. That's what I do anyways. Like if it's a financial issue or I just copy the appropriate person and say, here's the appropriate person to ask this question to, like, have a great day. I mean, so I don't know then if we need to copy the superintendent at all as part of this policy.
I think, a thought, I don't know that I'm correct or not. CC, our emails to staff are different from emails to citizens. Because we're legislators and each of us elected, we have a constituency that we're doing a job for them. Okay, now, if you're chair of the finance committee and you email to Mr. Brightman as chair of the finance committee, does Dr. Means need to know everything? I would, however.
When I email community members.
Right, but I'm saying the community members CC them all to him. I don't know. People, we have to use our judgment. But if I'm emailing to any employee when none of them work for me, he's the only one who works for us. I'm not sure that's always, I don't know. Dr. Means would have to speak to that. If I email to a teacher saying, oh, thank you and blah, 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 do you want to see that? Or maybe you don't care. I don't know. I mean, tell us what.
Don't need to see that.
You don't need to see. Well, I don't know, but that's why I'm asking, because we're talking about it. So I'm just asking if I'm emailing to a building principal that says, I don't really like your disciplinary practices there in that building. Well, he wants to, I bet you want to see that.
I
So,
would say board
Yeah.
members
So this-
shouldn't send that email.
Yeah.
might be, but this might be, talking about the onboarding or ongoing knowledge, this might be a place where we need a difference between practice and policy. So training in practice of what is, best practices for responding to emails could be like a training grid that has these examples of these different scenarios. And then, what are some of the recommendations of who should be on that email, rather than everyone being on everything. As you know, I've said already this evening that I'm worried about the walking quorum. I'm also worried about, and I would point to Eric's example, that we do occasionally get emails that might come to only one or two of us that have specific personal stories in them. And it might not, even if we educate people well, I think those stories, people need to tell them to school board members, even if it's not something we would act on, but we would pass it on to a staff member to act on. But to then have to copy everyone on it without informing that that person who sent it originally that we were going to copy on, I don't think we should assume that everyone, even with good communication, will know that when they email the school board that if someone responds, it's going to go to everyone. And I just see some risks in that for how we relate.
So I want to quickly summarize. Thank you for that, Dr. Worley. I have tossed out the idea of striking D. And I think there's going to be a bit of a rewrite to the email component of this. I also want to float out there, I would like to propose a hard stop on any policy discussion for this evening at 8:45.
Okay.
So depending on how we have a choice of either being thorough or quick, and it may vary, but
So we'll come back with the proposal with D out, because people can always try to put it back in, right? And we'll work on the email and also take into account the legal recommendation that it be text as well. Okay. Hopefully the others, I'm thinking we hit the hardest ones first, but maybe not. So 01, do we want to continue on the first reads? Because we have some second reads that would then go to vote if we do those in our 30 minutes left. So
I would leave it to the two of you to determine where to prioritize.
Bill?
Can I make a suggestion? I may be stepping out of line here. Because you have a lot of policies. So I have seen in the past, perhaps a board calls a special meeting for the sole purpose of policy. Because I think I'm trying to put myself in the position of Mr. Morris and Dr. Worley. To try to do this in the next half hour is virtually impossible. And I think, I'm looking at two former policy committee members, it's a heavy lift. So as you continue to move through these policies tonight, I would just maybe consider as a group, as a body, you may want to call a special meeting for the sole purpose of just
looking at policies. Thank you for
I think we
hearing
can
me.
do that. I would say what we finish, and maybe thinking that our first reads are more important right now because we are meeting right before the next meeting, so we could come back with more bulk action. But we won't be able to give you very much warning on what that's going to look like because our meeting is 4 to 5:45. So there's a flow thing. We could also choose to just act on those ones and get them off our plate. A policy meeting special would be good. I think that we have to give people a little bit of run time to figure out what a good date would be for that. But you want to break, Eric, before we do seconds? No? Because I think seconds are pretty clear if you read the PDF that came with the meeting tonight.
So,
That spelled out very specifically what our seconds look like.
so what I'm hearing proposed is that we pause on first readings.
Yes.
We've done 5120, 0144.5,
That's it.
and those are the only two that have received a first reading.
Yes.
We are then going to move to point B, second reading, and or action to approve several additional policies, and we'll spend the next half an hour on those 6 policies. If we have time, we can come back
Yes.
to the first one. Otherwise, we'll wait, we'll put them on our next agenda, and I'll consider a special meeting to review policies en masse.
So the second level ones or second read ones are actually, you'd have to click on an arrow, right, to move to the next.
I believe the first one of these is 0144.1 compensation.
Right, and just to draw attention that there is what I was mentioning at the bottom, there's a PDF. If you're looking at the screen, there's a PDF that says policy language recommended changes for 9/11/23 board meeting PDF. And I recommend that people have that. It's a good summary of what we're going to ask. So you want to start with you?
Yes, 0144.1 compensation. And basically in here, these suggested updates that we have for that one are line F, where it should be changed from will to may. Is that right? Okay, yes.
Line F.
Not line F, it's the very first paragraph, the first sentence in the whole policy.
Pretty sure I'm wrong in there.
Board members shall receive an annual, and says shall that we would put may in there.
Yes, board members shall receive an annual salary or an amount fixed by the school board for each school board meeting the member actually attended unless the member has provided timely annual notice of refusal to accept the salary. So the first sentence there.
So it may switch that shall to may, which was actually asked by one of our board members last time, and we wanted to offer that.
Right.
Is everyone following? Otherwise, we didn't come back with anything different based on what we talked about last time.
There's been a community question on how much is the board receiving in compensation. As of right now, there's been no proposal for the board, nor has there been any discussion
No.
that I have been part of about any compensation for the board on an annual basis.
Right.
Right.
Mr. Meyer?
So I myself wouldn't compensate board members, but the community input I receive is pretty much as unanimous as you can get about that people think board members should be compensated. On the childcare aspect, if we send a board member on a trip, we don't pay to take the child on the trip. But is the board member compensated for childcare while absent on the trip? There's a question. I don't know.
If I may, I think I answered that last time. It has to be through board approval.
Through board approval.
Right, so if they have,
Okay.
they have to present the full package,
Okay.
that I want to go to this conference in DC,
Okay.
but I need childcare, so at that
So there's
point,
a
we can-
linkage expectation there
Absolutely.
that the two
Right.
policies don't operate separately.
Yep,
They operate linked.
yep,
Oh, okay. All right.
because I agree with you. I mean, we're not providing, it needs to be reasonable.
Well, right, but I just want to know
Yep.
how this is going to.
You already had childcare set up on a regular
Yeah.
basis when you were here. I think the board would ask about that before.
So. I would ask for separate vote on 144.1.
I think we'll have separate vote on.
I think the plan is to have a vote on each one.
On each one,
Yeah.
okay.
So thanks for asking that. Actually, it's good clarification for everyone.
Okay.
Here, should we take a vote after all of the second reading?
Let's walk through all of them. Then we'll take community comment on we'll have word comment as we go, community comment one time on all of them. And then we'll take a vote. So we won't vote each time. I think that'll be a little bit more efficient use of our time.
Yes. 165.
Any other board questions or comments on compensation policy? Seeing none, we will move forward to notice of meetings.
All right, 0165.1 notice of meetings, and their proposed suggested updates would change community members to something more broad and also add an accommodation request process to that.
And the proposal that had been, or option that had been offered by the community comment on this was to change it to persons with disabilities instead of community members with disabilities.
Any concerns with that change? Seeing none.
And then as Phil said, to have that statement of where to, like we do on our other documents. I mean, we're just basically saying it should say, this one should say that as well. How do you find out about the accommodations?
Instructions.
I don't know if you have other comments. Any concerns with that addition? Change of regular meetings.
0165.2 change of regular meetings. Suggested updates are to change community members to, again, something more broad and also add the accommodation request process, same as previous policy.
To be consistent, I suggest we add persons, change to persons again. Although this one doesn't actually have that statement in it.
Yeah, I was just looking. It doesn't say community.
I think what they were asking last time was that we have that in this. So it's a little bit bigger of a change.
Okay.
That we would have a statement, because this one doesn't have, if you look at it, it does not have a statement about what persons with disabilities should do in regular meetings. So it's left out of what we're trying to do in all of our other documents. So
Sure.
that's why that was tagged.
So it's just being consistent.
It would be completing consistency with when we announce meetings. If we change them, they should still have the same statement.
So I feel like notice of meetings,
The 166 covers that.
yes. And it's just more words to have the
Because it
same.
says see policy 166 also.
Correct.
Okay. Then we don't need to make a change to it. What do you feel?
I think it refers back there and it says the same thing either way.
I wonder if it would be clearer if that wasn't in parentheses. If it just says see state law or is there a reason why that sits in parentheses? Because it almost reads, the first time I read, it almost was like the state law would be outlined in 166 or 166, but we have a district practice. It's not really just a state law. The person presenting last time was speaking to the ADA accommodations, not to the state law. I'm not trying to make it more complicated. I'm just saying that
I would have no recommendation.
okay. I'm okay with leaving it the way it is as long as there's 166 has those statements in it. Is that how other people feel too?
Seems to be unanimous. The next item is 0167.3, public comment at board meetings.
So 0167.3 public comment at board meetings, in addition to the recommended revisions that we saw previously that are there highlighted. Under F, add 30 minutes unless extended by vote of the board. And then under public comment, remove address. And then finally, under D, add request the assistance of security or law enforcement officers.
So I had one question to Eric. You were the one who brought up the actual 30-minute time. Is F sufficient place to put that? Because I might be wrong, but I thought that part of our conversation went towards having it standardized that the public comment at the beginning would be 30 minutes. an F says you have the right to, but doesn't say, as a leader, doesn't say that's how we practice. So I just wanted to clarify that because there's a lot in this one. So don't, even though we're in a rush time-wise, I wouldn't rush through this because we've gotten a lot of comment on this and I want to make sure that it really fits what we're hoping for. One suggestion that had been put forward by a comment was, what would a meeting then look like? And so the way this would read out, if we did it this way that we just said, the public comment would not necessarily be limited at the beginning of the meeting. It would only be limited if the presiding officer decided to do that. I just want to make sure that's what people were looking for, because we had a variety of conversation about that last time.
I thought, maybe I'm remembering this wrong, but at least my interpretation in that conversation was that it would be limited to 30 minutes unless, as a body, we decide to extend that time.
Right, and that's how I
opposed to
remember it too.
Yeah.
So this comment of adding 30 minutes to F isn't necessarily comprehensive in that direction. We would need to say that language earlier in a different, broader place in the document. So to lay it out, what we're talking about, what we talked about last time, in my understanding, was that it would be both kinds of comments, agended and not items at the beginning, limited to 30 minutes. That the next time that people could comment on it would be at the end of the meeting. There would be public comment. And that would be not limited, but it would be only on agended items that have been covered on the agenda. That's what I heard and wrote down in my notes when I left, but
That was my recollection as well. I don't recall as if we would limit the closing public comments to also 30 minutes.
we mentioned just having it open, but
My recommendation there is also limiting it to 30 minutes with, again, the opportunity for the board to always move a motion to be made and to extend if it's there. And I would say if the board, anytime the board wants to do that, the board certainly should do that. But that provides kind of a guidepost. I think whoever is the presiding officer, I never want to cut people off. If I would rather have it limited and choose to expand. And my experience is that the board has done that in times when it is so chosen to.
I'm going to suggest that we don't have the language for what I just described right now in here, that we probably need to take it and get that language. And any other comments that people have. We haven't had a meeting since the last time we met, so I just want to clarify this. And this one, I really want us to get this in a place that we all feel solid about. Is that a good decision to we come back with actual language that will show you what I just outlined and then. Okay.
And I don't know if we take the next 15 minutes to discuss that or if we do it at a separate meeting, but I do think that there were concerns not addressed, such as signing up electronically. I mean, I think we kind of had that conversation about having like an electronic database of people. And I'm not sure where we landed, but we definitely had that conversation. It's not addressed.
Mm-hmm.
And then one other point that was not addressed is whether we would take public comment virtually still or just in person.
So what I would say is we can't take a straw poll in the room to find out how we feel. We can make a motion. And then we can vote on the motion and provide guidance to the policy committee of here's what you'd like to see. Here's what the board would like to see. Leave it to them to come up with specific language that captures that and then bring it back for final board approval. And again, it's even at that point, the board could motion to make other changes. So that's how I propose that we use our time on this policy. But yes, that we don't finalize it tonight, but we make some motions to address some of those thoughts. Is there a motion that you'd like to make, Ms. Wills? And we don't have to approve it, but a motion that you'd like to put on the table so we can discuss it and consider approving.
I'd like to make a motion to discuss and
So
this policy.
I would say we're discussing the policy now. It would be I would be looking for a motion for a specific, you may not have one yet, a specific policy change that you're at, or policy change that you're advocating for, specific language.
Oh, I guess I don't have the specific language.
Okay.
So yours was about the residential, or the signing up. The
Yeah,
only thing we had changed on that was to not ask for the address.
right, but you're still requiring people to sign up electronically.
That's the proposal.
Yep. So I just
Again,
wanted to
that
have-
was a two committee, like from the earlier policy committee to us, and we didn't edit what had been done. We felt it healthier for the board as a whole to discuss it.
Sure, and I think with feedback from the community around that and even the discussion in our last meeting.
So I think what Eric's asking for is if somebody has a proposal on
Post-haste.
this, then it's helpful to the policy committee to then take that proposal back and work on it. Yeah.
Okay,
please.
so can I move to amend the current policy and
Or the current proposed
the
policy?
current proposed policy and take away that we would collect a electronic database of community members making public comment.
I'll second that.
So you want to remove the collection, is that also removing the registration? So you're asking not to have registration?
Correct.
Okay. So really, I think it's a clearer one to
There's a
say.
motion and a second.
Okay. May I have an offering discussion? Okay, I've been sat in the president's chair for 3 years. People come to the microphone, okay?
So you
Yeah.
you have a motion and you second, now you have to.
We're discussing the motion, okay?
Before we vote.
What?
Yes, go ahead.
Okay, my concern is not limiting public comment. My concern is that we help the president run the meeting. And I don't think a registration helps the president run the meeting. I think it could be used for other, different people could use that list for different, I don't want to go there. My concern is that we give the president aids such as, you know what, you got your 3 minutes, the bell dings, that's it. And then now the president doesn't have to try to persuade them to slow down, or a 30-minute limit. I want to focus on helping the president run the meeting, not limit. I think we focus on helping the president run the meeting, we accomplish our goals about putting some boundaries on, some reasonableness on the comment taking over the meeting. That's where and I don't think a registration helps the president run the meeting.
I think it can. I mean, I think especially in person, that if people sign up as they walk into the room, but that kind of lends to the discussion, are we still accepting virtual comment? I think when we know how many people we can anticipate in the room to have public comment, I think that will help with the efficiency of the meeting. But then again, that lends to the conversation, do we open it up virtually?
Well, that's where I'd have the 30-minute limit on comment period. And that Brett, he knows that I only got to survive this for 30 minutes. Because if it goes for more than 30 minutes, the chair has lost control of meeting management and about the agenda moving on through the evening.
I would be in favor of removing registration if public comment is only in the room. If public comment is more broad, I would prefer there to be registration so that we can keep better tabs on what kind of list that we have, how many people are waiting, so that we can make more appropriate decisions about whether to extend our time.
Would you offer an amendment to
That would be an amendment, friendly amendment to.
or a friendly amendment
Or
or
to
something?
accept it.
Or if Liz says it's friendly? I'm trying to help.
I think we need to have the discussion as a board. Are we going to, do we want to allow public comment virtually?
That wasn't motion. So yes, and we need to finish this conversation and vote on the motion and then move to that.
I guess I'm unclear and that's why I was trying to ask you for, I'm unclear on this motion about whether it sounded like it's not keeping data is the motion, not addressing whether we register or
So electronic registration would be a database.
What I'm listening to is remove any reference of a registration process prior to public comment is the motion.
On electronic.
Electronic registration. Because it says on here that they're required.
So you would, electronic, so that means you would do a paper one? Okay.
So when you arrive in the room, you sign your name if you want to do public comment. When the meeting starts,
Then that goes your comment of, then are you eliminating virtual comments?
Right. They feel very tied together in my mind, but
may I have a friendly motion?
I think you need to make an
Friendly
amendment to that for us to be able to talk about both,
do I have to make it? I don't know.
or someone should.
I don't have the,
Can I make a friendly amendment to
Chair on motion.
No,
Yeah,
it's Liz's motion.
add to Liz's amendment that we strike electronic registration and add in-person registration and public comment only in the room.
May I have a second?
Second.
So now the motion entails the striking of
Electronic registration.
electronic registration. That registration, the policy would be written that registration would occur in the room and that all public comment would be occurring in the room. Discussion. Mr. Meyer.
When you say registration in the room, does that mean, for example, they walk in, they sign their name in the list, and the first person on the list gets to speak first? So we don't have the jockeying for
right.
line at the,
That's how I would
Where
envision
we
it.
have done this is when we've had a really large room of lots of people,
Yep.
we facilitated a process similar to this. I would have expected it to be, there would be the first ones, that we would put the list out 30 minutes in advance of any meeting so that folks aren't sleeping overnight.
yeah.
But that we put it out 30 minutes in advance of the meeting,
Yeah.
that when you arrive, that you're given a chance to sign it, put your name on it, name, are you speaking for or against, or topic, or whatever the case may be. And
Is the friendly amendment to add in-person registration and in-person public comment?
Mhm.
Okay.
I wouldn't say for or against. Maybe they just want to help. I mean, now you know what, I'm a little awkward about
Yeah.
because that becomes a public record too.
Yeah.
What one district nearby has done, in my experience, was they ask you to, you give an opportunity to put your comment on a card, and then you say whether or not, you know what district I'm talking about, that means whether or not you wish to speak at the microphone about this. And then there's a person who sorts those cards. It is, and I was a parent in that district, and I felt very engaged by that process and very included.
so
So,
you can share your perspective with the board, but you don't have to do it, like, basically the board would see your comments.
yeah,
It would be public record,
yep.
but you wouldn't take time to speak. So
You
it's-
could choose, right.
Or you would choose, and it will allow the board, you then have the opportunity to email,
Mhm. You still have the email, all the other
come to the
options.
microphone, or submit a comment via a card in the room.
And that district also had an understood time limit. So when the cards were taken in the order that people turned them in as you came in. So if you changed your mind in the meeting and something came up and you wanted to speak at the end, if there was still time, you actually could go fill out a card during the meeting as well. What you did know was that if they ran out of time, the board would still see your comment, even if they didn't hear it.
Are the comments in that scenario, or the comments just, are the cards passed around during the
The
meeting?
cards were as
They
people
read by the
were
president?
available when they came in.
No, I
So-
mean, like, how
oh,
does the board see them?
Oh, well, so they hear them if the person is given the chance to speak. It's a public comment. Otherwise, now I'm outside because I wasn't on the board, so I don't know.
It would be given
They
to
would be given
the
copies.
Ms. Summers.
Passed
They
around.
would be given to the Ms. Summers of that organization, and then they would be transcribed and provided.
Yeah, not during the meeting.
Not during.
We don't see them.
Not-
No, they were held on to.
Gotcha,
Yeah.
okay.
So similar to the public comments that we received from Ms. Summers, like
Yes.
just put into a
Mhm.
public comment database, if you will.
I mean, that district also would receive public comment ahead of time, and, in between meetings as well, so.
Does this seem like an effective process from your perspective, Dr.
It
Beans
gives,
and
it
Dr. Worley?
gives people voice, and the public has has multiple opportunities to weigh in on topics.
I mean, I like that.
So if you don't have email, so not everybody does,
Yeah.
maybe you don't, you
You
know,
can-
maybe you don't have a device.
Yep.
You come in, you're right, okay, yeah.
Or you don't want to wait till the end of the meeting, but you think
Yeah.
of something, you can,
You want to be on record. You want to be on record.
Does that take into consideration accessibility? Like, would that box have to be right here at the top of the stairs, or would it be outside at any time outside the front doors? So we can come and drop it off almost like your suggestion box at Home Depot and inside the door?
Based on the language right now, it would be in-person registration and in-person public comment. So
In
that-
this room is
It
what I
would be
would,
in this room, it would not be.
so they would have to use other avenues if they weren't able to get here, such as email.
Or
So-
written letter. I mean,
Written letter,
I've received
phone calls.
written Letters for people and they drop them off to the district office.
Letters, phone calls.
They're 3 minutes from 5 or
Yep.
8:45.
Yeah, one left.
Policy committee, do you feel like you have ample feedback in terms of understanding? We've not voted on the motion. Do we want to, I think we should take a vote on the motion. We need to take community comment, not on the motion, we don't. And we're not actually voting on this
I don't
tonight,
think we have to vote on it, do we?
No.
not on this, we're actually not.
We could push it forward.
Yeah.
We need to-
First
Procedurally.
readings.
I think we need to vote on the motion.
The motion.
Yeah.
Ms. Summers, can you please call the roll?
Mr. Morris,
Yes.
Dr. Hoyt,
yes.
Miss Willis.
Yes.
Dr. Worley,
Yes.
Ms. Heimer Roland,
Yes.
Mr. Meyer,
Yes.
Dr. Jessup Binger.
Yes. So that motion, now that the board is officially on record of that, it's 2 key points. Let's move to our final policy.
0172.
0172 Legal Counsel. And the suggested update is to replace board president and superintendent with board president or superintendent. And so on that one, the board may employ or retain an attorney or attorneys to represent the school district or board in actions brought for or against the district and to render other legal services for the welfare of the school district. Authority to contact such counsel for legal advice or assistance on behalf of the district shall normally be that of the board president and the superintendent unless otherwise specified by the board. And again, that suggested update is instead of the and superintendent, it's board president or superintendent.
Legal counsel's in the room. So I'm going to ask a question. While I hope that this does not come to pass, if there is an issue that the board has with the superintendent, does this policy open up any issues? If we are in legal, something's gone sideways with the superintendent on a legal issue.
Client is always for authorizing authorizes the superintendent to access legal services or authorize legal services. That doesn't supplant the board as the client.
Thank you. I have no concerns about policy. To be clear, I have no concerns about Dr. Means doing anything.
Okay. This was in direct response to what Mr. Meyer raised last time, was to change it to or.
I think this is, helps the president of the board, because if there's an awkward circumstance where there's a question, it gives a safety valve where the superintendent can act as a positive force, right? Otherwise, if there's a disagreement between a board member and the board president, well, we need legal advice or whatever, or maybe the board president would have this come up, was a board member does something. It's like, well, I don't know if that's okay. We got to find out. I don't want, it's not a thing or not a thing, but we need to be sure. I'd rather have the superintendent make that contact to get that input on whether they're something that was done was okay or not okay. It puts the superintendent in a tough spot because he works for us in that sense. But that's where we rely on the ethics of legal counsel to be assertive about, as Mr. Waterman said, that the legal counsel applying their ethical principles solves a lot of potential problems. But legal counsel has to be assertive about putting boundaries on what they're asked to do. In other words, I'm saying we can't legislate everybody whether they do their job or not. Legal counsel has a job to do. They have to do it. And so I think we're okay.
So it's the opposite side of what you were discussing earlier before you engaged Mr. Waterman. What Mr. Meyer is bringing up is what if there's disputes, issues among the board? If you have to go through the board president and the superintendent, that may be awkward for a board member
Sure.
who's in conflict with said member.
Or maybe awkward for the president as well.
Right.
The president doesn't want to be the one to call the lawyer and ask the question.
So can we move on the ones that we have? Do we have time? Oh, comment. Public.
So what I would say is we have not had an overall motion for within board governance 0.5 to pass these policies as presented. So I would need a motion noting all but one of the second readings are coming forward for passage.
Liz was listed to.
I'd like to make a motion to approve bylaw 0165.1, bylaw 0165.2, bylaw 0167.3, and bylaw 0172 as presented.
Not the 0167.3. It's
Oh, I'm sorry.
0144.
Can I say with the friendly amendments?
No,
Okay.
I think they're going to take that back.
We want to take that one.
And then Mr. Meyer had asked to pull 0144.1 for separate vote.
If you move, you could always withdraw your motion and restate it.
Can I withdraw my motion?
Yes.
Can I make a motion to approve bylaw 0165.1, bylaw 0165.2, and bylaw 0172 as presented?
May I have a second?
Second.
Any final board comment on this item? Jamie, is there any community comment online on this item?
No, there are no hands raised.
Please call the roll.
Mr. Morris?
Yes.
Dr. Hoyt?
Yes.
Ms. Willis?
Yes.
Dr. Worley?
Yes.
Ms. Hammer Rowland?
Yes.
Mr. Meyer?
Yes.
Dr. Jessup Banger?
Yes. May I have a second motion?
May I have a motion to approve bylaw 0144.1 as discussed and presented?
May I have a second?
Second.
Thank you. Board question, discussion?
Does anyone need a recap? It's been 20 minutes. Okay.
Seeing none. Jamie, any comments online or comments online?
Yeah, we do have one hand raised. This is the user or the attendee named Deb. Please state your name and address.
Yes, hi, thanks. Deb Falk-Pellick. I do have a question on this one. Do we know when this would take effect? And I appreciate the fact that most community members have written saying they're not opposed to board members having compensation. And the reason I ask this is because one of our alder persons had said they're not allowed to vote on their own personal compensation or salary. And so would this take effect as each seat, so it doesn't look self-serving or something, that each seat as a person leaves the board, that then it would be, how would this work? So have we thought this out or asked for advice or looked at, for example, what happens with the city with compensation of alder persons?
My understanding is this would take place immediately. We are not governed under the same bylaws or policies as the city. Legal counsel, thanks for being here this evening. Is there anything within legal policy that would disallow us from voting on?
I haven't seen the policies, but as they go through.
I think you would need to review.
I'll repeat that. I haven't seen the policy or had a chance to review it, so I would be hesitant to render a legal opinion on that. But I'd be happy to look at it outside the meeting.
May I make a friendly amendment?
If it is to remove it and have legal policy look at it, that would be helpful.
Okay, my friendly amendment would be to say, to take effect as law allows.
That's even smoother.
It's a little loose, it's kind of loosey-goosey, but that means he can review it afterwards and tell us when it could take effect. Is that?
Good motion.
I second.
Strong.
That was friendly motion, but
Right.
I'm assuming it would only take effect as law allows anyway.
Yeah.
That's why it's a friendly amendment, just so we can all feel good that we actually said it out loud. Okay,
And remember, the wording is may, not shall. And
right, but the may is already in here.
Well, someone's actually reading
Okay,
the paper, they'll see shall, not may.
I'm lost now.
We amended that in,
Right,
And,
we already.
no,
did that.
in spoken, we
Yes,
amended it.
yes.
I just want to make
Oh,
sure.
that supports it as well. They may.
Yeah.
Yeah.
If it's illegal for them to accept it, then they
Right.
don't have to accept it.
Right.
Oh, I see. Yeah, I see your point. But I still say to take effect as law
I think
allows, so
that's-
the
I think that makes
the
sense.
reader from afar can see, oh, yeah, it's okay.
Jamie, any other public comment?
No, there are no hands raised.
With the friendly amendment attached, please call the roll.
Mr. Morris,
Yes.
Dr. Hoik,
Yes.
Ms. Willis,
Yes.
Dr. Worley,
Yes.
Ms. Heimer Roland,
Yes.
Mr. Meyer,
No,
Dr. Jessup Banger.
Yes. And that passes. We will come back to additional first readings, and more from the policy committee and a possible special session of the board to review policies. Next up is D, reminder on the joint common council meeting on September 19th, 2023. Just a comment for the board and for the community. The Wauwatosa Common Council and the Wauwatosa School Board will meet and hold a joint meeting at Wauwatosa City Hall on September 19th at 6 p.m.
The location may be different. We're unable to have a location that can host both the common council and the school board in the same place. So we may need to have the board here, and the common council in their chambers in order to report it. So that's the one change that we've discovered.
Is there an email about this? This is the first I've heard of this.
I just found out on Friday.
Yeah, it was a little bit recent, it seems like, because
The joint meeting has been shared with us several times. The specifics on location have not been shared.
I don't recall ever actually hearing about this at all.
It's been in several emails from Dr. Reeds. I'd be happy to walk through it.
Okay.
Session.
I mean, that's fine. I'm just looking around the room and I'm seeing baffled faces, which makes me think maybe others of us.
my recollection was a discussion of it, but not a specific date. That was,
yeah,
What
I'm
was the news?
equally baffled, but whatever. So,
So you may want to, that's fine to have the date. You may want to go, like, you may want to poll members to make sure we're going to actually have a quorum.
Who's able to attend?
This is
calendar.
I'm not.
Does Jessica have to send this?
I know I don't have my family calendar.
Alicia sent it.
Look for additional information on that. Is there, Jamie, to close up the evening, is there any public comment on non-agenda items?
Yes, we have one hand raised. Deb, you have the microphone. Please state your name and address.
Sure, Deb Falk-Pellick. I appreciate the fact that there's legal counsel in the room tonight, and I'd like to make a suggestion, and I don't know if this is typically done, but with these policies, what do you think about having legal counsel look at them before they get officially approved? Just to make sure that there's nothing that is being missed, since I think we only have one attorney on the board, but I don't know if that's the role necessarily of Mr. Meyer for that. But perhaps this would be a good idea to make sure that nothing is missed. And I'd like everybody to reflect on what truly is the problem with opening up the ability for members of our community to engage virtually in comments. It comes from a standpoint of privilege to assume that all members of the community can actually come there. Now, some of you will be getting potentially reimbursed for childcare. Maybe members of the community can't come because they can't pay somebody to come to a meeting. Maybe members, as Mr. Morris pointed out, there could be disability or accessibility related issues. So I'd really encourage you to reflect upon really what is the problem for allowing what has been a wonderful way for the community to engage with doing virtual comments. Thank you.
There are no more hands raised. Oh, we do. Sorry.
Thank you. And I just want to say this is public comment at the close is on non-agended items. Because that's an agended item, I did not stop the commenter, but we will not take any more comments on public comment or anything else that was previously on the agenda this evening.
We have no more hands raised.
May I have a motion to adjourn into executive closed session?
So moved.
We need to read it out.
Sorry, that's me, I think. It is recommended that the school board adjourn to closed session under Wisconsin statute 19.85, parens 1, parens G, conferring with legal counsel for the governmental body who is rendering oral or written advice concerning strategy to be adopted by the body with respect to litigation in which it is or is likely to become involved. And Wisconsin statute 19.85, parens 1, parens E, deliberating or negotiating the purchasing of public properties, the investing of public funds, or conducting other specified public business whenever competitive or bargaining reasons require a closed session. Specifically to consider strategy related to a lawsuit against the district brought by a school board member, including possible settlement and Wisconsin statute 19.85, parens 1, parens F, considering financial, medical, social, or personal histories or disciplinary data of specific persons, preliminary consideration of specific personnel problems, or the investigation of charges against specific persons, except where parens B applies, which, if discussed in public, would be likely to have a substantial adverse effect upon the reputation of any person referred to in such histories or data or involved in such problems or investigations. Specifically to discuss an investigation into allegations of misconduct by a school board member, and I so move.
May I have a second?
Second.
Question, please. The content related to property, is that a separate? There's multiple things in this notice. The part about the notice that has to do with, I mean, I'm assuming like a land purchase or a lease or something, something, is that? Which I'll say the wording. Yeah.
19.85.
That's how the statute is written. You have to read the whole thing.
I don't.
I'm just wanting to understand that whether there's something, another topic that is to be covered tonight, or whether it's stuff we've been talking about. Is there new business in this?
No,
Okay.
Is it just because it involves a finance?
it's a continuation of business. previously
Okay.
discussed.
This is the financial piece, I think.
Okay, because I don't want to vote against closed session for something new that is in a different category. Okay, thank you.
Please call the roll.
Mr. Morris,
Yes.
Dr. Hoy,
Yes.
Ms. Willis,
Yes.
Dr. Worley,
Yes.
Ms. Heimer Roland,
Yes.
Mr. Meyer,
Yes.
Dr. Jessup Banger.
Yes. Please note for the community, we may return to open session. So,
And we have a recess to break.
yep, let's take a 5-minute recess.
Need to leave that. You know.